have more than 80,000 participants attending this event from more than 90 countries. Can we use gross national happiness instead of GDP in least developed countries, as it includes ethical values and good governance? The question is in reference to the rampant increase in corruption in some LDC and developing countries like India, Brazil, and Bangladesh.
Yeah, GDP definitely is not the measure of happiness.
All at J.M. Smith that we were supposed to be a good supplier to our customers, be a good customer to our suppliers, be a good employer to our employees, be a good citizen of our community. This conference and in everything that the Jan Center and its associates are doing.
Your knowledge is your wealth. Your intelligence is your wealth. Your personality is your wealth. That is your dollar. I started with $1 in my pocket, school dropout, 8th standard, but I am here in front of you with 1 lakh students, with campuses across the country, students. And before I started in education, I already created 3,500 entrepreneurs.
Shiva ma'am, am I audible?
Yeah, you are.
Yes, Rupa ma'am, you are audible, ma'am.
Behind is also the best position to develop future leaders. From here, one can see who is most effective at handling obstacles and also influencing the rest of the team for better and worse. While building a compelling case for gender diversity, advancing women leadership in the workplace should consider all these dimensions. It is indeed an honor and a privilege to be invited at the International Research Summit AVLOKAN. The literal meaning of AVLOKAN is the art of self-realization.
If you complete this cycle, it becomes a very sustainable model, wherein there is no shortage of resources for conducting further research if you make it applied. And I must reiterate that I do not undermine the importance of fundamental research or purely academic research. This needs to be kept in mind as far as research as an activity is concerned for academic institutions. Now, being such a patient students, particularly you all, I don't have enough words to thank you for what you have put out. I think all attention of the university is keeping you all in mind, and you will be the ultimate beneficiary of whatever you are trying to do.
The thing is to redesign the banking system so that they are devoted to do the work, the whole bank, not just tiny window in the conventional banks.
The bank in Bangalore is doing very well for the poor, and it's doing very well in
Thank you. Thank you. I'm glad to hear that.
It's at 6,000 crore level they have reached, Grameen. It's all your Professor Mohammed Yunus. And they have been effectively doing it for the poor, and poor is becoming better and better. Even if a vegetable vendor is there, he's able to earn 5 lakh rupees a year and pay his fees for his children. So your philosophy is working across the world.
Thank you so much. I'm glad to hear that.
So the next decade is about 7 Ds. Disease is not going away so easily. So I cannot predict what will happen, but yes, I do see it is causing the digital divide between rich and poor. But at the same time, you see, with respect to my previous answer as well, that these technologies are making field level for every.
Skills and network. So skills plus network is success. Only success in networking is not in finding the right person, but in becoming the right person. True value of networking lies in helping others. Now,
regarding introverts and the connect with networking, I just wanted to say that a lot of people who are actually introverts and they feel hesitant regarding networking. They feel like that it is not for me. But I think your talk has definitely motivated them, and I think now they can go ahead with it.
Our weaknesses represent our greatest opportunities for development. Plant many seeds, and not all of them actually grow up to be a fully nurtured plant. Some of them do, right? So you expose them to many things, and you take a step back and you start seeing where they are flourishing, and kind of build a theme around it, right? There's a theme around like a pool of talents which are around that theme. Start identifying and observing that theme. And as parent and as role models, just nurture, just provide the nurturing, giving them that opportunities, and they will thrive. They'll just do what best they can do.
For all the people who are yet to start their corporate jobs, who are yet to start their entrepreneurship journey, my dear friend, this is going to happen with you also. Unless and until you understand that the funnel that needs to be inverted. Okay, so in today's dynamic market, in today's global market, it all begins with networking and building the relationship.
So the bad comes with the good, as I pointed out in so many of the examples.
How do we differentiate ethical, moral, and legal behaviors in our course of achieving our life goals? Don't the three behaviors overlap and create confusion in the process of achieving our goals of life?
The severity of the bad, number one, and ease of implementation, the other thing. Now,
I want to share the idea that this is the way we respect other people. We don't do it by holding their hands in an age of COVID. We do it by the Asian way, actually, of acknowledging their presence and their importance and their dignity. So I thank all of you for sharing your thoughts.
Thanks.
What light means to the darkness, that is what Dr. Kotler means to the creator in me.
Dr. Philip Kotler to me is the inventor, creator, and preserver of contemporary marketing.
For me, Dr. Kotler is a university in himself.
A benevolent teacher who has bestowed the world with the invaluable treasure called marketing.
Dr. Philip Kotler means he provides values and solutions to the world of marketing. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Dr. Kotler, your presence is an enlightening learning journey, not just for us, but for the thousands of people watching us live across the globe.
I send my best wishes to Jane and your university and all of India. Thank you.
you can play the same video again. You can stop the video. Good evening, Darshan sir.
Good evening, sir.
Good evening, sir.
Good evening, Maithili ma'am.
Hey, hi, good evening. How are
Good
you?
evening, sir. Nice to see you, sir.
Yeah, you can just call me Darshan.
Sure, sir. We'll begin at 6 o'clock. Schedule time. Gayatri, now you can play the video.
Dear participants, welcome to our 9-day International Entrepreneurship Summit, the most awaited event of the year 2022, AVLOKAN 2.0, requesting all participants connected with us in this journey through Facebook Live and Zoom platform to stay tuned with us. We are going to begin in next few minutes.
Basaki sir is joining in another 5 minutes.
Okay.
Okay.
Yes.
So we can wait for another 5 minutes, I think, and then we'll start.
Sure, sure.
Gayatri, by the time you can just play the after movie of our previous Avlokan. We have more than 80,000 participants attending this event from more than 90 countries. Can we use gross national happiness instead of GDP in least developed countries, as it includes ethical values and good governance? The question is in reference to the rampant increase in corruption in some LDC and developing countries like India, Brazil, and Bangladesh.
Yeah, it's GDP definitely is not the measure of happiness.
Just a minute, sir is just joining.
Yes, sure.
Basaki, you can start now.
Okay. Namaste and a very good evening, participants, delegates, speakers, and dignitaries. Welcome to our 9 days International Entrepreneurship Summit of AVLOKAN 2.0 on Beyond Sustainability, Trends in Regenerative, Socially Responsible Community Ventures organized by Vidyanidhi, Student Research and Development Cell, in association with Gyanidhi, Faculty Research Cell of Center for Management Studies, Jain deemed to be University. Dear participants, we began with the sessions 3 days back with your immense support and presence, with a desire to continue this journey for the upcoming days with the same enthusiasm. Thanks once again to all of you for joining in and making this summit worth the effort. And on this note, I would like to invite Dr. Rupa KV presenting to you our legendary speaker of the session. Over to Dr. Rupa.
Thank you, ma'am. With immense respect and gratitude, I am pleased to take this privilege to welcome our esteemed speaker of the session, Mr. Darshan Doshi. So Mr. Darshan Doshi is the founder of Dasar, an online community that offers habit-forming programs to enable people in achieving their health and wealth goals. On Dasar podcast, you will find interesting conversation with founders and investors. Over the past few years, he has worked with 100 plus founders in various roles at the Reliance Jio Gen Next, Vadvani Foundation, and Flame University. As the director at Adoption, he has been working with a stellar team that is building one of the most innovative learning and development SaaS products that is loved and used by thousands of business leaders around the world. As the founding director, Center for Entrepreneurship and Innovation at Flame University, he is building entrepreneurial village that nurtures and supports entrepreneurs. He recently launched the one-year PG program in entrepreneurship and innovation to enable entrepreneurs of all kinds. As an advisory board member at Babson College Collaborative, USA, he is enabling member universities around the globe to create a strong entrepreneurship education ecosystem. Previously, he has led operations at Reliance Jio Gen Next, managed family business in fertilizer and engineering, and led strategic projects at VR Grace USA as a part of its marketing leadership program. He graduated from Babson College with honors and has been active in the US and Indian startup communities in various roles. He is an active Thai charter member on its governing council and member at the Pune International Center. So as a super mentor at various venture fast track program organized by Vadvani Foundation, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and AIM iCrest, he is guiding startup incubator CEOs to create effective startup ecosystems. So we extend a warm welcome to Mr. Darshan Doshi to deliver his talk on how to pitch your startups to investors. Over to you, sir.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Rupa. That is such a generous and kind introduction. Thank you, Dr. Varsha, and the whole Jain University team for inviting me. But most of all, my gratitude to the 322 people who have joined over here and some more people on Facebook and other social media channels. You know, you could have spent this time wherever else you wanted to. You could have gone on Netflix or Hotstar and you could have spent time over there. But you've chosen to be here, right? So I want to do justice to your time, and hopefully I am able to give you at least one, if not 4 or 5 key takeaways out of this session, right? I'm very familiar with other languages too, so feel free to add your questions. Let's make this as interactive as we can be. Okay, I'm here for you. So if you are not getting benefit out of it, it's not worth of anybody's time, right? So let's make it, I have a presentation. I'll share the presentation. We don't have to complete the presentation. What is more important is your questions, okay? There is no silly question. I was a beginner. I am a beginner when I am starting something new at Dasar today. I am not an academician. I launched a 1-year postgraduate program in entrepreneurship at Flame University. I've done a lot of things for the first time, and I've started that by asking some very silly and stupid questions. So please, let's have more questions come through from you. And Dr. Rupa, if you could bring those questions to me, because I'm going to share my screen, right? So I might not be able to do that. Just stop me there and then, and you know, let's make this fun and interactive. Okay.
Sure.
So I'm going to share my screen, and I'm going to share and talk a little bit about pitching, right? Startup pitching. If some of you have seen the latest Shark Tank India, right, which is put the social media and news channels on fire lately, right? I actually pitched in the original Shark Tank, right, which was, I hope you can see my screen. I'm going to make this full screen, right? Who do you see here? You see Mark Cuban, all right? You see Damon John. These are the original sharks from Shark Tank in the US. This is me 10 years ago. I got this great opportunity to pitch to these guys when I studied at Babson College in Boston, okay? Within 3 months of reaching Boston, I'd won the internal competition. Big credit to my friend who's on my right side, Joseph Drashel, this handsome looking guy. He's an actor, director. And we were working on a gamification startup in 2011 using augmented reality. Think about it like a scavenger hunt, but you actually have actors around you, and you could use virtual reality and augmented reality to play in it. And that got us a lot of good credit, right? We won the internal competitions. We got a $40,000 grant to go to Startup Chile in Santiago. We made a little bit of money. We made a few thousands of dollars while Joseph and I were students as MBA students at Babson College. But we got an opportunity to meet people such as these. You know, the pitching experience was unlike any other. The rigor that we were put under over almost 2 to 3 weeks. I remember being in the parking lot and just rehearsing my pitch for nights together. You know, I would have my wife is an art of living teacher. She would go in Boston to take you know, the course, and I would be in the parking lot practicing the pitch as much as I can. Right? It requires time. It requires effort. There is no substitute to hard work. But it's a lot to learn. Okay, and a lot has changed in the last 10 years, where I've had a chance to meet over 5,000 entrepreneurs across India, across the US. And I've been pitched to a lot, and I have pitched to many other people as well. And so I'm going to try and distill some of the learnings for you over here, okay? The base reason, okay, is why should we pitch at all? Why can't people just do what I say, right? मैंने बोला है, मैंने बनाया है, मेरा product है, right? Build and they will come, right? That was the mantra back in 1800s or a century ago, because there was not enough supply, there was more demand. in the last 100 years, we've become a materialistic world. There is more supply then there is probably demand for every single product out there, right? You're using Amazon, you're using Flipkart, you're using Shopify. You know what I'm talking about, right? Even just in a simple thing like a phone, you have like 20 options that you can buy today. So why pitch at all? Okay, you can pitch to investors like Shark Tank. I need money. I need to grow my business. I don't have money. So you can pitch to banks. Traditionally, if you see our parents, my parents, there was no venture capital industry. So you would go to a bank and you would do a pitch. You would say, here's a business plan. Here's what I want to do. Here are the financial projections. Please give me a loan of 2 crore, 3 crore, 20 crore, 500 crore, whatever might be the case. The second is you're always pitching to customers. When you are trying to build a business today, I'm trying to build Dasar, or 2 years ago, in the middle of pandemic, I launched the 1-year postgraduate program in entrepreneurship and innovation at Flame University. I was the biggest proponent, and I used to pitch anyone and everyone. I am pitching to you right now as well, right? I put in the contact details. I put in the contact details of Dasar. I put in the contact details of Flame University. I put in the details of Adaption. Why? Because अगर मैं नहीं करूँगा तो और करेगा कौन, right? And an entrepreneur's job is to get the things done, right? Which means you have to be shameless. You have to be courageous. So you have to go in front of customers and you have to say, please buy this. You know, the 90-day Get Financial Freedom program, it goes live on Sunday. Okay, this is for people who want to get their personal finances in order. You could be 15 years old, you could be 50 years old. Okay, everybody wants to make money, but what are you doing to improve your routines, your habits in order to earn money or grow money or manage money, right? And so every day in the evening from 8 p.m. to 10 p.m., I just pick up the phone call. And from 8 p.m. to 10 p.m., I'm only trying to get customers. Okay. Hey, Rupa, I think, I know you for some time. This is what I think this program is about. I think you might be interested in it. And this is where the context comes in, right? So pitch can be, there are different variations of a pitch for an investor, for a customer, for a partner. Now let's think about a partner, right? Adaption is in leadership development for business leaders. And you will find that there are various companies which do assessment, right? You have MBTI, you have 360 degree, you have Strengths Finder. So then we go to Strengths Finder and we say, hey, Strengths Finder guys, you're doing an awesome job. You help people find out what their challenges are or what their strengths are. Now, wouldn't you want someone to actually implement those and help them improve? That is where adaption can play a part, right? Let's partner together. हमारे जो customer है वो आपके पास भेजेंगे, आपके जो customers है हमारे पास भेजो, right? And so that's how, in a very simple way, you can partner. Now, there's a lot of jargon words. Okay, I try to keep it extremely simple, common sense. Anybody, my 9-year-old twins should be able to understand this, right? Competition. You should go and talk to your competition and pitch to your competition too. You never know, they might turn into a collaborator. Okay. Or you can take a look at what your competition is pitching. What are they saying? What are the choice of words they are using, right? And lastly, press, right? Times of India, mein, Byju's, White Hat Junior, right? All of them pitching all the time. What are they doing? Why are they putting all of this? Shark Tank, someone, so yesterday or day before, one of my close friends, Rohan Rehani, he runs a company called Moonshine Maidry. He was on Shark Tank India, right? And why did he do that, right? Is a good question to ask. Yes, there are investors, but there is also a lot of press, a lot of coverage, which can help you get in the limelight if you can use getting in the limelight correctly, right? See, being in the limelight is not the point. there could be a lot of articles written about it. Does that translate into you getting your objective, which is funding or customers or something else, right? So that is why you need a pitch. I'm going a little fast. If you want me to slow down, if you have any questions, just stop me. All right. What are the various formats of the pitch? Today, everyone's attention span, thanks to these mobiles and Instagram, is that of 5 seconds. Okay? Instagram Reels, right? Nobody, tell me, when was the last time you sat down and watched a 30-minute video? Not a Netflix series, not a Netflix series, when someone was explaining something. I know at this point, the moment I get boring, you're going to go to your phone. You're going to go to WhatsApp. You're going to see your next notification. You're going to see what photo of sunset your friend has posted, right? That's all right. That's all right. What I'm saying though, is you need to grab attention and you need to retain that attention by continuously building curiosity, continuously adding value. How do you do that? You, as a startup, as a person who's building business, you need to have a 30-second pitch. You know, it's easy to say and ramble on, you know, Dasar is this for 30 minutes. You're not going to care. What you are going to care about is, I have a personal finance program. Are you interested? I have a fitness yoga meditation program, which you can do at the comfort of your home. Are you interested? I have a 1-year postgraduate program, which at the end of the program, you get at least $10,000 scholarship from Babson University if you choose to do a master's program. I've given you a 10-second pitch right there, right? Similarly, 60-second pitch. Similarly, 3-minute pitch, 10-minute pitch, 20-minute pitch. If you're going to go to an angel investor, now I'm an angel investor myself. I've invested in just over about 20 startups, right? And I've seen roughly another 50, 60 startups raise a few $1 million or few tens of crores, right? Rupees. Those meetings, if I have to invest in you, I want to probably take more than 20 minutes and probably more than a meeting of 20 minutes, right? So that is another reason why you are thinking about the pitch format, which is longer, right? So then that takes me to the next part. What are the different elements of a good pitch? You need to have a story. You need to be entertaining. You know, in the education industry, there is a lot of need for entertainment being issued as well, right? Games have been used forever to teach people. We use games to teach children, toddlers, right? And adults are nothing but overgrown children. So we have to keep that entertainment value going on forward as well, because it increases engagement. How do you keep it entertaining? You have to have a story. You have to have a hook. You have to have a follow through, and then you have to have a conclusion where you have, it can be an ask, it can be a click to action. It could be anything else, right? There are various ways by which you can activate that value that you might have created. Second, I'm talking about Instagram. I'm talking about my own experience. I shared my own story. My network connection. I hope you guys can see me. My internet connection was just a little bit unstable.
Yes, sir, yes, no problem.
There's no emotional connect. Nobody's going to listen. Should I care?
Dear participants, please be with us. Mr. Darshan Doshi will be joining in back soon. Thank you. Dear participants, we welcome to our 9-day International Entrepreneurship Summit, the most awaited summit of the year 2022, AVLOKAN 2.0, requesting all the participants connected with us in this journey through Facebook Live and Zoom platform to stay tuned with us. We are going to begin again in next few minutes, as and when Mr. Darshan Doshi joins.
I am back.
Yes.
Hey, so sorry. We've just had a network connection. I've connected to my phone. So what I was saying is, without an emotional connect, it took a minute for me to come back. Many of you have gone on your mobiles. Hopefully I can reel you back in, right? Third one is clarity of thought and action. When you're pitching, you need to have extreme clarity. Okay, one of the things that I've seen, and I was guilty of this because I've grown up in Pune for the first 25 years of my life. And then I went to Boston. And in Boston, I learned how Americans pitched, presented, talked, articulated. Okay. And in the last 10 years, I've really improved my articulation, my communication skills. I hope this is a testimony to that, right? Be direct, be clear, don't beat around the bush, get to the point first and then unfold. Okay. I think that is a very important parameter to have a good elements of a pitch. I've seen so many founders in India who are just not able to articulate as much. Okay. Now, don't get this wrong. All what this means is we need to work doubly hard to work on clarity of thought and articulation and action. Fourth part is energy and enthusiasm. If you don't show energy, why should anyone else care? Why should anyone else show energy? If you don't support yourself, if you don't have the self-confidence, if you don't have the energy to jump up and pitch at 3 o'clock in the night, okay? कि तुमको ऐसे रात को उठाया और बोला चल, you need to pitch. This is what you have to do. You should be ready, right? And then last one is an ask. What's the purpose of anything if there is no end point and end outcome to it? Okay, so you have to actually flip it over. You can either start by saying, this is my ask, and then you tell the story, or you tell the story, get to the ask, and then move in different elements. And I'm going to cover this part of it as well. All right. Start with a story, build credibility. Okay. I think what Rupa did is she's put up a lot of credibility in the start. She gave such a long introduction. I was only feeling embarrassed, right? But essentially, what does that do is it shows that who you are talking to and why should you listen to this person? What has this person done? I tried to establish my credibility upfront. This is a session about why anyone should pitch. What was the first photo that I put up? Me with Mark Cuban and Damon John and Schlesinger, right? In that saying, I've pitched to these guys, right? That was not to boast, but to establish credibility at the start that I have done this, and from my experience, I am talking about this, right? And when you talk from experience, people are more likely to listen, right? The third one is show how big the problem is. When you are pitching to an investor, okay, what does the investor want? The investor wants that if I put 1 crore rupee in your startup, you should be able to make me 3 crore or 4 crore rupee in the next 5 years, roughly, right? You can obviously say, there is more money to be made. Everybody wants more money to be made. But an investor is kind of wants to know how you are going to make that 1 crore to 5 crore. Now, if I am putting 1 crore, right, then there will be a total of about 4 or 5 crore that will be actually invested in your company. which means that will be at a valuation of roughly at about 15 to 20 crore, maybe 25 crore, right? Which means your valuation needs to be at least 5 times in the next 5 years, if not 100 times, right? Now, when can your valuation be 100 times? When you are able to grow at a insane pace, right? Think SpaceX, think Flipkart, think Zomato, think Swiggy, right? We have so many examples in front of us. So it has to be a big problem. If you come to me and say, I want to start a trading business, मेरे को trading करने का है, chemicals में trading करने का है, उसके लिए मुझे 1 crore दो. I'm going to say, why will I invest in that? What is the innovation? How big is that problem? How do I know you can compete with the likes of, say, Zuari Chemicals, which has been around for like 30, 40 years. It has all the money, all the resources, all the network, all the distribution in place, right? Just because you want to start does not mean I'm going to invest, because I don't have the confidence that you can grow this business and return me money, right? So showing a big problem is not only about optics. Okay, it is not just about optics. सिर्फ दिखाने का बोलने का नहीं है. You should be able to follow through. Okay, and then show how the solution works. So you should be very clearly, and I'm going to give you an example in the coming slides. Okay, so maybe I'll actually move forward a little bit. Why is this idea important now, right? If you are looking for an investment, right, you can actually say, I don't want to raise an investment. I just want to get feedback, or I want to pitch to an investor. I want to pitch to a customer so that I can get the customer to pay and buy my product or offering or service today, right? But in that also, what is the differentiation, right? Why should you join Dasar program? Why should you join PGPEI, right? My pitch is simple in Dasar. You know everything that is there. Go watch everything that you want on YouTube, on Instagram, get all the inspiration on Instagram and Twitter. When you want to apply, right, and you actually want to get an outcome where you are better at operating yourself, where you are better at managing your money, where you are better at getting your fitness, right, then come to Dasar. Because what we do is the boring work, the tough work, which is day in, day out, putting in that one workout, doing that one exercise, doing not just learning, but applying and getting over your own fears, your own limitations, right? So that is the differentiation, right? अगर knowledge चाहिए, YouTube देखो और करो और फिर बोलो कि आता है कि नहीं आता है, right? Knowing is not equal to doing. There is a huge difference between the two. And when you want to do and become better at it, that's what Dasar is good at. Similarly for PGPEI, right? So I'm not going to give that example, but you can understand what it is. What is your go-to-market and business model? How are you going to make money? When are you going to make money? Do you have your financial projections in place? A lot of people answer to this, I'm not a finance student. I'm not good with numbers. Well, you're pretty good with numbers to come and ask me for money, aren't you? Right? So sorry if I'm being a bit blunt, but you need to know your numbers. If you want my attention, if you want my time, you want my money, then you should be prepared completely to be able to answer and show conviction. Give me confidence that you're the right person to put my money on. What is my alternative? I can put that same 1 crore in a fixed deposit. I can put it in sovereign gold bond. I can put in other startups. I can put in cryptocurrency, right? There are so many other ways by which I can put the same money and get a assured return if I have to, in the case of fixed deposit. The seventh part is that you should cover in your investor pitches traction. What does traction mean? Traction means how many customers have you actually got? How many variations of your product have you tried? What is your technology stack? how does your operations work? Have you got everything figured out in order to go from 10 customers to 100 customers to 1,000 customers? What have you achieved in the amount of money that you put in yourself, right? Because you would have started, right, before coming to me. Hopefully you're not coming with only an idea. You would have implemented that idea. You would have put in your own 2 lakh, 5 lakh, 20 lakh, 30 lakh. So my first question would be, in the 20 lakhs that you borrowed from your parents, from your own savings, how much money did you generate out of it? Were you able to generate at least 2 lakh rupees, 10 lakh rupees, 20 lakh rupees? And if you didn't put your own money, why should I put my money in you? Right? So those are some good questions that a lot of investors will ask. And then the last one is ask and milestones, right? So you can actually ask for money, you can ask for advice, you can ask for introductions to customers, introductions to partners. There are so many things, right? And then you have to also let people know what the milestones are, right? So what does milestone mean? If you're going to take, say, an angel round typically is 3-4 crore rupees. If you raise 3 crore rupees by the end of this month, at the end of next month, the month after, month-wise, what are going to be your milestones over the next 12 to 18 months? I want to know exactly, and I want to see those numbers, right? And that is the level of detail that is expected from you. This is a norm. You might not know it, but this is a norm, right? So having very, very clear idea about it. Sometimes you have to also, I always tell a lot of entrepreneurs who want to play the VC game, right? Venture capital game. I ask is, what is that money going to get you? Right? That money that you are raising is going to get you some resources, right? So can you get those resources without getting the money? It's a good question to ask and worth spending a little bit time on, right? Because then you can avoid going through this whole process of pitch karna hai, puchna hai, paise kidhar hai, kya hai, all of that stuff, right? Here's an example. I don't know how many of you are familiar with Intercom. In any website that you go, you'll find this chat icon on the bottom right? So Intercom was one of the first ones to make that happen back in 2013 or 12 or something like that. And this is their actual pitch deck in which they raise their money, okay? The first slide was only about Intercom. What is the team? And they will show you, what they have done, who's doing what, not fancy titles. Okay, it's not about the titles, it's about who is doing what part of the business. And then, what have they done before? So establishing credibility upfront. What is the problem that they're trying to solve, right? I can't interact with my customers or my website visitors when they come on the website and they're scrolling through it. So can I just put this chat icon so that I can chat with them and integrate it with WhatsApp or Facebook Messenger and I can interact with them, right? So that is what they were building, right? Building meaningful relationships with customers in hand, which is hard or impossible for SaaS providers, right? You want to build relationships with them so that you can service them well. If you service them well, they will continue to take subscription. They will continue to, or they might buy from you, right? Because why have that chat icon? I have some question which is not answered. That is why I am not buying. So to help overcome that concern, this is the simplest way to connect directly with the customer so that you can overcome that constraint so that that customer pays or takes whatever necessary action. What is the solution? A simple install like Google Analytics, customer-based browsing, individual customer research, advanced in-app messaging, and customer relationship management. Very, very simple, right? What is the market? At the time, this market has grown significantly over the years, but $21 billion market. What they will do, also mobile and desktop app providers. This is a very important slide. What is the landscape? What is the game that you are playing? right? Who are your competitors? What are they doing? What is your differentiation from them? How will you do what part of it better is a very important parameter to think about. Progress or traction, right? The product is in development and in testing. It is ready for public beta. A demo can be given. And here's a testimonial. Jason Fried is one of the most established founders in the world. And he has given a Twitter response. What a fantastic product idea. I wish I had thought about it. What a simple way of putting, minimum words, clean look for impact, right? And then what are they looking for? $600,000 convertible note. Okay, look at the specificity of it. 18 months runway so that they can do these 4 things and they will raise further round. Why have they written plan to raise a further round? As an investor, when can I expect the valuation to increase? When will my money actually increase? Even if it's paper valuation, I want to see what's the roadmap that these guys are thinking about it. So it's a very, very nice, simple slide deck, right? Some simple ways to avoid some mistakes. Tell everything instead of what matters. Okay, I've seen a lot of first-time founders do this out of excitement. मेरे को सब बोलना है, ये भी किया मैंने, वो भी किया. So what, right? Always take a step back. Practice. Catch hold of your wife, catch hold of your parents, catch hold of your friends, catch hold of your professional contacts. Get investors who don't invest in your type of business and practice with them and ask them for feedback, right? Say, what did you not understand? What could have been done better? What worked? What didn't work? How was my energy level, right? Pitch. Before you actually pitch in front of, it's like net practice, right? You don't go straight into a test match with South Africa. You do a lot of net practice. You do a lot of practice games. You play Ranji Trophy. Then you get selected for under 19. Then you go into the main game. And then you get a chance to shine, right? There's a lot of legacy, a lot of grunt work that needs to be done, right? So you need to do that grunt work for your pitch as well. One of the things that I've seen is there are 3 people building the business, so all 3 should talk. Why? Who's the best person who can communicate and articulate and has the best energy? Okay, between me and Joseph pitched the idea. Could I have pitched? Did I contribute to it? Absolutely. But what was the context? We were in the US. I was an Indian with an Indian accent who spoke indirectly versus my buddy, Joseph, was a previous actor, stand-up comedian, and a director, and an American. Hands down, he was better than me, right? My ego did not come in between to say, nahi, main hi karunga. I was better at Q&A amongst the 2 of us. So we had a very clear understanding कि जब questions आएंगे, which type of questions Darshan will take, which type of questions Joe will take. Right? Too much text in the slides, right? Please don't do that. See this slide itself. Very, very simple way to do it. You can spend $20 and you can get a good template to make slides. And then one mistake is मैंने एक pitch deck बनाया है, बहुत अच्छा है, it's gold. तो वही इन्वेस्टर को भी देंगे, वही कस्टमर को भी देंगे, वही पार्टनर को भी देंगे, वही सबको देंगे. Why? Take the effort. The other person is spending time for you, is giving their attention to you. Take at least that much amount of time to prepare and fine tune your pitch for them. Take the efforts, right? Very, very important. Some other mistakes, no clear ask. Presentation de diya. So what? Did you want feedback? Did you want me to just listen? Did you want me to just ignore? Did you want money? Did you want me to introduce you to someone? Right? Another one is you've been given 5 minutes time and you take 10 minutes to present. Why? Can't you practice enough to nail your presentation in 4 minutes, 30 seconds? Just practice. Put a timer. You have a stopwatch. You have a phone, right? Get it right. It's not that difficult, right? Don't chalta hai attitude mat rakho. Every detail matters. Everything that you do matters. Everything that you speak or don't speak or your body language matters. Okay. Reading from slides. I'm looking behind and I'm reading from it. Why? Don't you know your slides? Don't you know what your pitch is? Haven't you practiced it enough? And then failing to give a live demo. Now, this is something that everyone loves to do. मैं live दिखाऊंगा कैसे चलता है. And technology, just the way today, my internet, didn't work for a couple of minutes. It works flawlessly otherwise. It comes for the time when I'm a speaker at this session in front of 450 people, and conveniently the internet has gone, right? So what can go wrong will go wrong. Do a pre-recorded video, integrated in your slides, show how your product is going to work. Integrate, right? Show your customer testimonials if you can. A video is better than text, always. Everybody is moving towards 10 seconds, 20 seconds attention span, right? Yeah, so that's it. I think I'm going to stop sharing. 6:44, not too bad. 15 minutes for Q&A, right? I hope I have given an example of trying to complete my own presentation in time as well. So I see a few questions there. How do we want to do this, Rupa?
Thank you so much for bringing in your expertise and experience before us. It indeed is a pleasure listening to your profound ideas. Now we'll take up some questions from the participants. We have a question from Ms. Krupa Shah. When you are pitching to your competitor, doesn't it become risky to give out your idea?
Interesting. A lot of insecurities come out when we talk about competitors, right? What happens agar idea steal kar liya, right? Now, if you just go on Google and you say, give me $1 billion business ideas, you'll find a lot of them. You'll find pages filled with them. I can challenge you that if you sit down over 5 minutes, you can come up with various business ideas which are worthwhile. But like I said, knowing is not equal to doing. To start a business, to create a niche, to create a differentiation is not very easy. I'll give you a playbook and still I'll ask you to run with it. You should have that conviction, right? How do you go from, this idea is really good and let me apply. I'm going to make, say, 1 crore rupees from it. To have that energy, enthusiasm, and then the discipline to follow through, to actually take that playbook and to apply it, there is a whole experience that goes in between that, right? And that is what conviction comes through. You work, then you know, and then you say, I'm not interested. Then you hit a wall, and then you understand, why am I even doing this? Chal kya raha hai? Why am I wasting my time, right? It's not worth it. So, a long answer, but to answer that question, you should be business savvy. You shouldn't tell everything to your competitor. Get to know your competitor first. Talk to the founder of the competitor. Check if this person is mature enough to have a conversation with a competitor in a way to learn from each other and to support each other and grow, and potentially even partner down the line. Okay, doesn't happen many times, right? Because our behaviors come in between, our insecurities, our fears come in between. But I have seen enough cases where startup founders have helped each other while operating in the same space, in the same domain, in the same geography, and they've fed off each other to make each other be better, right? So I think Rafael Nadal, Roger Federer, pushing each other to be better, playing the same sport. Think like that rather than What if this person eats my cake, right? That would be my suggestion.
Thank you, sir. We have another question from a participant called Adad from Algeria. The problem of investing in emerging enterprises in developing countries is the problem of the state's monopoly on advertising. How can this problem be addressed, especially for young investors?
That's a tough one. It's specific. It's a very, very specific question. I'll try to do justice. So if there is a monopoly, or that's the differentiation, right? So if I understand your question correctly, what you are saying is, in some countries, the government, the local government backs certain startups and gives them an undue advantage. I hope I have got that right, but I'll try to answer that question from that point of view. That's so Paytm, you know, when demonetization happened, the government of India actually promoted Paytm, which is unlike a free market where competitors fight for each other and fight for the market, right? When it is endorsed by the government of India, then or instituted it, right? When you are paying your electricity bill, you'll find a Paytm option, right? That's an undue advantage. You want to be in that position. No question about it, right? You'd rather be in the position where you are backed by the local government versus you're against someone who's backed by local government. How do you overcome it? I can't speak with experience. I don't have any. What I can suggest, though, is you have to pick your markets. You have to pick a niche. You have to see what else you can do. And typically in large markets, even if there is typically a case where not only one competitor, there's only monopoly, right? Typically monopolies don't quite exist. You'll have at least 2 or 3 competitors operating in that space, right? So Zomato, Swiggy, Uber, Lyft in the US, Uber, Ola in India. So you'll have multiple large companies operating in the same space, going after the same customers, right? So I think it is still possible where you can create a defensible, aggressive approach towards that market. I hope I've answered that.
Thank you, sir. We have one last question from a participant, Dr. Mohammad Jahangir Ali. What are the social dimensions of entrepreneurship?
Can you repeat that, please?
What are the social dimensions of entrepreneurship?
Social dimensions.
Right.
Okay, this is a tough one. Okay, so I'll tell you what I have learned from Babson College, right? I'm an alumni of Babson College in the US, #1 in entrepreneurship. And I'm today on the advisory board of the Babson Collaborative, which has about 30 universities participating in it, right? Trying to build entrepreneurial ecosystem. There's a lot of talk around what does entrepreneurship, who is entrepreneurship for? What are the different kinds of entrepreneurship, right? And then Babson comes out and says, we support entrepreneurs of all kinds, which is what I love. So first part is, why does media, why do we look up to the likes of Elon Musk, to the likes of Vijay Shekhar Sharma, to the likes of Ratan Tata, Mukesh Ambani, right? Zomato, because those are outliers. Those are exceptional capability or outcome freak accidents, if you may want to call it. There's still a lot of effort that goes in it. Please don't underestimate the work that has gone to make it that large. But media loves to showcase outliers. The second part is, what about the mom and pop businesses? You know, the small MSMEs constitute about 72% of India's GDP. Okay, and MSMEs, the micro, small, medium scale enterprises, typically anywhere in the world, constitute about 40 to 60% of the total GDP, right? So are these businesses bad? No, that business which my father started is a small business. It gave him the lifestyle that he wanted. It fed the family. We came from a very, very limited background, very constrained background, financially constrained background. And I was able to do my education and be who I am today, right? So that is entrepreneurship of great kind, according to me, right? It enables people, it enables families. The third part is social entrepreneurship, not for profit, right? Again, thanks for the CSR movements that have taken place in the last decade, environmental impacts, right? Recycling, then energy, all of these industries and domains are really, really good because there is a place for them. What is the social dimension of this? Entrepreneurship has equal to progress, right? Entrepreneurship, because what does an entrepreneur try to do? Try to solve a problem that is not yet solved today, or is solved and can be solved better, right? Better, faster, cheaper. And so there is innovation which is ingrained in entrepreneurship. You can't survive a business, at least not for a very long time, if you don't continue to create value and capture that value, right? So there are two parts to it, value creation and value capture. So from a social dimension standpoint, it is the backbone of the economy. We had the startup day, National Startup Day that happened. There are research studies which say that most new jobs that are going to be filled. So India needs to fill in about 10 million jobs a year from now for the next 20 years. Who's going to absorb that workforce, right? There is a big case being made that startups are the ones who are going to absorb that large workforce and not necessarily the very large corporations. Large corporations continue to take majority of the workforce, so we should not discount them. But the delta between an existing organization versus a well-funded startup today, say like a Swiggy, Zomato, InfoEdge, is different, right? It is the one which is driving the economy, right? Because if these guys can feed the household income of people and move lower middle class to middle class to upper middle class and above, that's the impact on the society of entrepreneurship. So a slightly long intellectual answer, but I hope it made sense.
Thank you so much, sir, for such an engaging discussion and enlightening us with your wonderful views and enriching thoughts, quenching our thirst for knowledge on the prospects of business, management, and entrepreneurship by bringing in your expertise and experience before us. The way you threw light on the idea of pitching startups to investors is worth words of wisdom, clarifying our participants' doubts through your in-depth knowledge. It's been indeed a pleasure to listen to your wonderful session. I'm sure our participants would have taken back a lot from your engaging discussion. You enlightened us with your profound thoughts and innovative ideas, bringing in an innovative approach to us. Thank you once again, sir. Over to Professor.
Thanks a lot for having me here. It's an absolute pleasure. I'm going to put in my my call to action. Connect with me. If there is a way I can help you, please let me know. And do subscribe to my newsletter. I write, I podcast, and I podcast about all these things. How can we be better, right? So would love to have you guys on board. Thank you again. An absolute pleasure to be here. And thank you, Jain University, for having me here.
Thank you so much. Sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Shifa. And before we move ahead, I would like to acknowledge the presence of Dr. Amrit Lal Bharadwaj, Professor, Cardiff Business School, UK, Dr. Maithili P. Rao, Coordinator Research Programs, Jain deemed to be University, and our respected Director, Dr. Dinesh Neelkant, Center for Management Studies, Jain deemed to be University. And on this note, I would like to invite Professor Sunil Hegre to introduce the next speaker of our session.
Baisakhi ma'am, just wait. Let me just see. Yeah, sir has joined now. Welcome, sir.
Good evening, sir.
Hi, good
Yes.
evening. Nice to see you all.
Same here, sir.
Good evening, sir. So,
yeah, Professor Sunil can take over now.
Yeah, and on this note, I would like to invite Professor Sunil Hegre to introduce our next speaker of the session. Over to Professor Sunil.
Thank you, Professor Baisakhi. Now it's time to introduce our next speaker of the session, Mr. Gustavo Rojas Ayala. Mr. Ayala currently serves as the General Director for Mexicanos Primero Sinaloa, a nonprofit organization that advocates for children's right to education through research and policy analysis. He also has experience in directing intervention projects aimed at increasing educational justice in Chile and Mexico. He holds a master's degree from Harvard Graduate School of Education, a BA in Journalism and Social Communications from Pontifical Catholic University of Valparaiso, and several international certifications in collective leadership, inclusive education, teaching, and learning in marginalized communities. He is also an Enseña Chile alum. And here, we feel extremely delighted to have you with us. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much for your kind introduction. Good evening, good morning, depending on wherever in the world you are joining us today. A big thanks to the organizers of this wonderful event for the invitation to participate. I'm honored to be here with you this morning. And before I begin, I wish to thank Dr. Chenraj Royhand, Chairman and Chancellor of Jain deemed to be University. I would like to thank Dr. Raj Singh, Vice Chancellor of Jain deemed to be University, Dr. Dinesh Nilkant, Director of the Center for Management Studies of Jain deemed to be University. And finally, I would also like to thank Dr. Varsha Agarwal, Summit Convener, the Head of Research and Consultancy Cell of the Center for Management Studies of Jain deemed to be University. As I said, I'm very honored and delighted to be here with you today, this morning. It's really early for me. It's 6:34 in the morning here in Sinaloa. So I don't know if anybody from the organizing team could support me with this.
Yes, sir. Should I start? Yeah, I'll do that.
Yes, please. Thank you.
Sure, sir.
Great, and we can jump in straight to slide number 2, so that I can walk us through the itinerary of this conversation. The purpose of our talk, because hopefully we'll get a fair amount of time to exchange views and opinions about this topic. But the main purpose of this conversation is to explore ways in which the crisis that the pandemic caused on education systems also represents opportunities to innovate and to drive change. Some parts of this talk will be based on information that has been generated by international collaboration, multilateral collaboration institutions, with the aims of helping governments to navigate this crisis more effectively. Other parts of this talk will be inspired on my own journey as an educational leader and practitioner, and thereby will include very personal and subjective views about the matter. I will, of course, also draw very heavily on the work experience I have gathered with my colleagues at Mexicanos Primero Sinaloa, where I currently work, and where one of our main interest points over the past 2 years has definitely been the pandemic impact on local education. And after this introductory section, I will start by sharing some of the most relevant known and estimated impacts of the pandemic in global education, so that we can frame the scope and the magnitude of the crisis it generated to then understand the scope and magnitude of the opportunities to innovate that arise from this crisis. After that, I will share some reflections about the need for collective and adaptive leadership to seize this crisis as an opportunity. I will then move along to a following section where I will discuss some alternatives through which I believe it has been possible to innovate in the way that education systems have responded to this pandemic. And the final section of my presentation will briefly address some opportunities for innovation and change that are proposed by the most recent report by UNESCO, which is a product of the work that they have done through the International Commission on the Futures for Education, that I believe presents very interesting paths for an ongoing discussion about the opportunities to innovate and to drive change in education systems internationally. And finally, we will get to a Q&A section where hopefully we'll get a chance to expand on these topics and to talk about any other issues that are relevant for this event's audience. So can we please move us to the next slide? Okay, perfect. So by now, many of us are probably very well acquainted with some of the most significant impacts of the pandemic over education. Maybe the transition to online instruction or to remote means of instruction has been one of the most immediate and most common ways to respond to the crisis. In many ways, this pandemic and the crisis it brought about in education systems has enabled that spaces like this, conferences like this, are now considered possible, and in many ways even preferable than in-person gatherings. As much as I would have loved to be in India with all of you in person today, it is also important to notice that many of these events transferred to a digital landscape also do have a very positive impact on things like climate change. So it is important not to lose perspective on some of the external benefits that arise from this transition to digital environments. However, a careful review of the available evidence is beginning to show clearly that for many learners, remote instruction has only been a poor replacement for in-person instruction. So I would like us to review some of the most relevant consequences of the decision to close schools for learners, with a specific focus on K-12 students, which is where the main focus of my presentation and my professional experience contribute to. And please move us to the next slide. Okay, so I remember that 2 years ago, during Christmas 2019, I was I think it was after dinner with my family, when I began to see the first reports of a new virus that was impacting the lives of people in China. And only a few weeks or a few months later, we would see that this new virus had been capable of impacting almost every single corner of our planet. And it is very hard to believe that 2 years have already gone by. 2 years of disruption, 2 years of uncertainty, where more than 1.6 billion children have been affected by total and partial school closures. School closures that we as adults, as responsible adults, responded to the uncertainty, to the lack of evidence about the possible risks of transmission of the virus, but that we couldn't be sure if that would have been the decision made by students upon this very same uncertain scenario. But as adults, that's what we decided. That's what our governments decided to do. Our first initial response was to close schools. And in many places like Mexico, schools closures are still being used as a way to mitigate the rates of spread of the new variants of the coronavirus, which severely affects the life of children in ways that we will be able to discuss later. But however, things are different now. Now we know that it is possible to keep schools open following health and safety measures. We also know that, of course, not all schools in all parts of our countries face the same conditions, have the same infrastructure. In some cases, some schools lack some conditions that more affluent zones do offer in their schools. So, but we do know that it is now completely different than it was 2 years ago, and that these differences have made so many countries adapt to the pandemic and do offer in-person instruction more often. Of course, the arrival of new variants, specifically the most recent variant Omicron, that has configured new complex scenarios in many of the countries that have decided to keep their schools open, especially in the northern hemisphere of the world. We see that local and national governments are indeed struggling with teacher shortages produced by the rise in positive COVID-19 cases. However, vaccination has made the consequences of these new waves less lethal than previous ones. And the main concern still remains on how to avoid the collapse of public and private health services. It's not a life or death type of scenario as it used to be maybe 12, 15 months ago. But still, the elements of this crisis configure a very complex scenario. And that complex scenario has moved different countries into different directions. So this graph that we see on the screen was produced by UNESCO's global monitoring of school closures caused by the pandemic. And what it shows, it shows great variance in the types of response. So each color on the screen represents a possible status for schools. For instance, the red color represents times in which schools have been partially open. And the purple color represents times where schools have been closed due to COVID. So wherever you see a purple color, it means that schools have been predominantly closed. And wherever you see red, it shows that schools have been predominantly open, at least partially, right? So the difference of the colors show that countries are doing very different things when it comes to what to do with their schools. And if we move on one more slide, we can see the specific case of India and Mexico. If you look at the upper row, you will see mainly that the main color there is purple. That is Mexico. That represents the fact that during most of these 2-year period, schools in Mexico kept fully closed. And as I said, schools have been officially closed in all of the country a couple of weeks ago. But then if you look at the case of India, what you will see is that schools have been open at least partially for more time than they have in Mexico. Maybe some of you will agree, some others will disagree with this information, because I know that after all, India is a very big, a very diverse country, and national statistics might not always accurately describe the local realities that many of you might be familiar with. And of course, partially open still remains a very broad and a somewhat vague concept. What is actually a partially open school? Is it a school that opens its doors only 1 or 2 days a week? Is it a school that opens its doors every week? every day for all of their students or only for a portion of their students? So we still have all of these questions, right? But what we can account for by using this type of evidence is to at least highlight that there is a very different type of management between one country and another one. So places like Mexico and places like India are making completely different decisions about what to do with their schools. And as we saw on the full chart, this is representative for a large amount of countries in the world. They're all doing different things. So the big question remains, what are the impacts of this scenario? What are the impacts of this changing, diverse scenario on student learning, and what are the impacts on educational opportunity, on the type of educational opportunities we are offering to our younger generation? Please move us to the next slide. And before we begin answering this question, which as I said, it's important to understand the scope and magnitude of the impact of the pandemic to sort of understand with greater precision what are the possible alternatives to drive innovation. Before answering the question about the impact of the pandemic on learners, it is very important to state that there are some major difficulties here. Mainly due to the lack of sufficient official information from governments about the actual impact of the pandemic on student learning levels or in school dropout. For instance, if school is not mandatory, if schooling, in-person schooling is not mandatory for every single student, which is something that many governments have actually authorized, people can go to schools voluntarily. So that's also part of the definition of partially open, right? Schools are open, but not every student is actually required to attend. It will be very hard for us to really account the magnitude of how many students we lost during this time with school closed, right? School dropout is going to be a very difficult thing to measure precisely through official government data. However, this lack of information in some cases has been countered with projections, with estimations that have built, for instance, upon evidence that we had on how students used to see a decrease in their learning levels during summer break. This is a type of research that mainly comes from a US education-based perspective, but it is very helpful to sort of see what the impacts of X amount of time without in-person instruction were. And what researchers have done is that they have extrapolated all of these expectations, and they have fitted models to understand how different alternatives of schooling, ranging from school closures of different lengths to full in-person instruction, can configure different scenarios for the learning expectations. But still, we need to be really insistent that these are projections, that these are estimation, and that only in some cases this will be more precise findings. And luckily, there seems to be more and more of that evidence produced lately. But still, it was important for me to make that distinction. So since most of the evidence we do corresponds to projections and estimations, it is also very hard to account for the specific effects of school closures in pooled terms, right? So the only claim I will make here is that there is sufficient evidence, or at least sufficient hints, to accept that the longest the period with school closed, the greater the consequences on student outcomes. Student outcomes such as learning loss, such as school dropout, or disrupted socio-emotional development, which are the most typical consequences we will discuss here. And there is, however, a very impactful and clear piece of data about the overall impact of this crisis over learners, and it's right there on the screen. And it has to do with the economic costs of this disruption, of this discontinuity in children's learning trajectory. And that data is that for the current generation, the economic losses associated with the interruption of in-person schooling could ascend to 17 trillion US dollars, which is a fairly large share of today's global GDP. So we're talking about something that, although in many countries, is still not considered a severe catastrophe, a severe crisis, it is going to have an impact both in the economic dimension of our collective life in societies, and eventually it will get to also probably have some impact on the quality of the social cohesion within our societies. It might be a factor driving greater inequity levels, which might at the same time be have a negative impact on the democratic quality in our societies. So all this comes to say that although we do acknowledge the lack of sufficient evidence from every single country in the world, we do have enough evidence or enough reasons to believe that this crisis, that has not necessarily been the health crisis, but the decisions we have made about what to do with schools are going to configure a really complex scenario for the next years or for the next decade. But if we move to the next slide, we can begin to see that some international reports, such as this one you're looking at on the screen, edited by the World Bank, that do describe the scope and magnitude of these consequences, drawing on the most important pieces of evidence produced internationally. As I said, not all of this evidence corresponds to official government data-based evidence, but they do come from very respectful academic institutions, or in some cases, civil society institutions. There are fulfilling that void of evidence that governments have not been able to fulfill. And it covers evidence from countries in Asia, in Europe, in Latin America. So it allows us to have access to a very large international perspective. And this is important because although I will explain with more detail results and impacts on Mexico, it is very important to understand that when we talk about opportunities for innovation, that necessarily means learning collectively, cooperating internationally, and being able to help countries that are facing similar challenges to come up with decisions in shorter time spans. We need to have shorter learning curves to be more successful in countering, in mitigating the negative effects of the pandemic. So the fact that institutions like the World Bank, and as we see other institutions like the OECD, are continuously making the efforts to produce international and comparative evidence, we should be very aware of the potential that has to help our countries to share with each other what our learnings are and what best practices could inform our own decision-making locally. So now I would like to zoom in some of the results that we find evidence of in Mexico. So if we move us one slide forward, please, we will see two charts that are part of a recent paper published on November 2021 that talks about the impact of the pandemic, or more specifically, the impact of school closures on student learning. As I said, this is not government data. It is evidence, however, that was raised and processed by Mexicanos Primero. This is the institution where I work. and that is thereby considered a citizen-led assessment. But the sampling design and the analytical design, they do allow us to claim that these findings can be used for inference about the scenario of most of Mexico's student population. So what you see there is a pattern that we believe most likely be present in other countries as well. On the charts on the left, we see what is the increase in learning loss levels, both in reading and in math, controlling by students' socioeconomical level, socioeconomical status. And what we see there is that not only on average or in general do learning loss levels tend to grow, but that they grow even more wherever students are facing the poorest economic conditions. So this is probably not new for anybody doing work on international development or doing work on education as a path to greater social mobility or social justice, because we do know that traditionally learning gaps exist, and that these learning gaps affect negatively those students that live in the most marginalized conditions, economically, socially, right? And in this case, we also see that the gaps are larger in math, which is also something very interesting. We wouldn't be sure that this is the case in every single country. Locally, we see that that's where the gap becomes the most evident. We did not catch that evident gaps whenever separating results of boys and girls, but it's all about economic level, and specifically in the case of math, that becomes really, really evident. For reasons of time and space, I did not include here any results about data on the socio-emotional status of students and families, but I will share that this research showed us that almost in every household, we surveyed 2,000 households in two southern states in the country. So the research showed that in almost every household, it is possible to account for the impact of the pandemic, both on the health and the loss of lives of family members, and in the impact of the prolonged confinement, which has definitely taken a toll on people's mental health and well-being. And finally, what this data does not show is what are other types of impact that unfortunately are impacting children's life, like an increase on physical and emotional abuse from family and community members, or how not attending schools makes students stop receiving some very important supports, like vaccination or nutritional supplementary programs, right? So it is, as I said, a very significant piece of evidence that probably, it is representative of other countries as well, but in this case, highlights what's the actual impact of the pandemic on students in Mexico. So what can we do? Next slide, please. That is the question I want to take us to now. What can we do? And before talking about what can we do, I will talk about what could we do, which is the question I asked my team two years ago when we were first confronted with this crisis scenario. Next slide, please. So on February 2020, I was barely starting my tenure as General Director in Mexicanos Primero Sinaloa. I had had the opportunity to return to Mexico from Chile to transition from roles leading school intervention projects, working with teachers, into a more policy-oriented line of work and institution. During a 10-year period before the pandemic, I had actually, all of my professional experience had been in projects aimed at, decreasing or eliminating these learning gaps, bringing about greater social justice through a better education quality in countries in Latin America. And in this region of the world, which is where I have had all of my professional experience, it was clear that there were some very severe learning gaps between the most privileged and the most marginalized students. And that was pre-pandemic, right? And although we had made significant progress bringing all students or most students to school, bringing education to most corners of our countries, there was still a big issue with quality and with equity concerns. So to us, it was very obvious at the beginning that the negative effects emerging from this crisis, we didn't know what they were going to do, but we had enough reasons to suppose that this unknown phenomena was going to cause a greater damage on those students starting off with clearer disadvantages. And I think that the slides I already shared sort of confirm that hypothesis, that this was going to be a crisis where big inequities were going to configure different outcomes for different people. And as the work I have been lucky to do in Teach for All partner countries, I am a Enseña Chile, Teach for Chile alum, so I was a teacher with them for a couple of years. And then I had the opportunity to work in Teach for Mexico and move back to work with Teach for Chile. So all of that experience in these Teach for All network countries showed me that there were efforts being made by a large community of specialists, by a large community of leaders in the international education field. So it was clear that this crisis was in many ways also an opportunity to deeply challenge ourselves, to challenge the assumptions of what education should be, about the roles of schools in our societies, and most importantly, about how education could be conceived as a place and as an opportunity for collective leadership to emerge and to guide a systemic transformation. And these were the types of reflections that I entered, that came to me when we needed to reconfigure all of our annual plan. The COVID pandemic hit Mexico and hit us in Mexicanos Primero with a yearly plan that was already designed. Our yearly plan was ready by January 2020, and all schools in Mexico closed in March 2020. So that meant a complete reconfiguration of our efforts. And the details of all of those reflections can be found in a chapter on this book, on leading education through COVID, where alongside many other educational leaders and colleagues from Harvard Graduate School of Education, we share some personal experiences in confronting this crisis that has, for many of us, been a very big invitation to reflect on our own personal leadership. And most important, I think that these kind of collaborative spaces for collective reflection helped us to see that there were going to be some very real and unique opportunities for innovation to arise, and that we could seize those opportunities both to respond to the actual present crisis better, but to prepare for future crisis scenarios as well. And also to reconsider what are the type of changes that are necessarily not only to restore education systems to their old self, but to build back better version of themselves. Because we must not forget, we were faced with dramatic inequities prior to the pandemic. So coming back to doing what we did before the pandemic is not necessarily going to lead us to a better off position for everybody, right? So these were the type of reflections that accompanied me and our team when we were first confronted with this pandemic and with this crisis. So if we move us to the next slide, please. I would like to talk about how innovation has finally been a way for education systems to find a surviving toolkit. How innovation has meant, in many cases, the survival and the continuity of education systems, and how, therefore, innovation became a way of responding to the immediate challenges of this crisis. So I will talk about innovation as response. Next slide, please. And to organize this part of the presentation, I will propose that, as I said, it was innovation that kept education systems on the go. In times of disruption and uncertainty, many of the decisions that had to be taken were confronted with huge levels of uncertainty. And that challenged the status quo in so many ways that I believe it forced a somewhat forced innovation period. Everybody had to innovate, and they were forced to do it. There was no way of doing that. So I will address how these opportunities to innovate manifested in 3 different domains or dimensions. The first one is how this crisis expanded the school ecosystem and how it added a new digital layer to what we now consider schooling to be. Second, I will talk about how, through the use of data, new opportunities have emerged for decision makers and for decision-making protocols about what to do with our schools and with our education systems. And related to that, I will explain how the pandemic also created a window of opportunity to rethink how the governance of schools and the capacity to make decisions in schools became redistributed in ways that might be beneficial for greater levels of democratization across education systems. So if we move to the next slide, we can start talking about the first dimension, how technology has created not only the opportunity for education systems to continue to stay alive, but to bring about a very relevant type of change, which I believe is an ecological type of change. Because if we consider education as an ecosystem, I think it is pretty obvious by now that the physical notion of schools we used to know is now accompanied by the idea that learning can also be pursued remotely by using digital connectivity tools, like the ones we're using here, we're using for this conference to take place, or like the many other tools that kept education systems running all across the world. And of course, this does not mean only online instruction. It also means all of the other different alternatives that were used by governments to keep remote instruction going. It means, for instance, in the case in the case of countries like Mexico, the use of television as a conveyor for educational content. In other places, it means the use of radio as a tool. And in many places in the world, it means the use of social media communication, social apps on our cell phones, like WhatsApp, which in the case of Mexico as well, has been by far the largest conveyor of educational interactions between families and schools during this time. So I believe that here we will most likely see, if we're already not seeing, if we are already not experiencing that, and a spike in the increase and creation of new services for online social interaction oriented towards learning. And these tools will create, as I said, an extended ecosystem, a new digital layers around schools. And I believe that this eventually is going to give us the opportunity to maximize learning, not restricting it to school walls. However, I think it's also very important to be aware of the fact that this new layer can also be the source of even greater levels of inequity, right? So the first question here is the question of whether educational agents all across countries, all across regions within countries, all across all types of schools have the capacities to adopt a digitalized approach for instruction and to manage education system. So do teachers have that capacity? Do school principals have that capacity? Do mid-level officers within the public education bureaucracies have that capacity? And that's one very important concern in terms of equity around this new digital layer created around schools. Second, there is a question about the type of changes in teacher professional development that are required to shift from an exclusively in-person instruction to a blended, or we can name that mixed or hybrid modality of instruction, right? So are we prepared for the changes in pedagogy that are required to maximize the benefits of this digital layer that we added to traditional schooling? And finally, and most importantly, there is the question of how are countries to address the digital divide in infrastructure and connectivity that many schools and communities, especially in marginalized communities, still face, right? And this is, of course, essential to greater levels of equity when it comes to taking advantage of the benefits of this process of digitalization. And we are starting to see some very promising alternatives to democratize access to internet connectivity. For instance, let me share with you that very recently, a pilot of bringing satellite internet connectivity to rural communities is being piloted in Chile. And I believe those are very promising alternatives. This is done in partnership with Starlink, which is Elon Musk's company that has the mission of connecting every single corner of our planet to satellite internet. And this could be a game changer, right? But we need to consider not only this matter in terms of access, but also in terms of the capacities that education leader and practitioners have to actually make this into an opportunity for greater equity. Next slide, please. Second, I would like to discuss a domain in which I believe innovation has also allowed education systems to respond to the emergency. This is a picture of the School Return Index, which is a tool created by Mexicanos Primero to orient the decision of where and when to reopen schools. By drawing on public data available for over 140,000 primary and secondary schools, and crossing that data with relevant demographic data from families, from households, and from data about the levels of intensity of the pandemic, we were able to create a model that could balance both the need, the urgency of schools to resume in-person instruction, and the levels of opportunity of such schools to return to in-person instruction. So what we were trying to do through data, through innovation, was to balance the right to keeping healthy with the right to resuming the educational trajectory interrupted by school closures that, as we already saw, is having very negative effects on students' learning, especially in those learners that live in the most marginalized communities. So in experiences, these type of projects, there are no blueprints. Many of the decisions you need to make when you create a project like this are based on discretion and are thereby necessarily biased. In this case, we actually opted for a very explicit equity-oriented bias so that we could make sure that all of our analytical model was prioritizing that we would identify which schools had not only the greatest necessity to resume in-person instruction, but the greatest opportunity to do so, right? So that we would avoid greater levels of learning loss by identifying which schools should be the first to reopen, and in ways that allowed us to advocate for them, right? To be the actually first to resume in-person instruction and to receive targeted support from educational authorities. Again, this is a tool created by civic society organizations. This is not a tool created by a government. And unfortunately, it has only been partially used by decision makers to craft plans to resume in-person instruction in the country. Specifically, in the case of Sinaloa, which is the state where I live and work, we were able to see that after providing the government with a report that informed about the different recommendations for all Sinaloan schools included in this project, there was a clear prioritization of these schools. And we did see that the schools with the greatest urgency and the greatest facilities to resume in-person instruction were actually the first ones to resume in-person instruction, the first schools on the list of the reopening process. But unfortunately, we have not been successful in getting the federal government, the national government, on board of using this type of tool to organize the reopening of schools in a more effective manner. And we have not been successful either in having families interested in learning what is the specific profile for their children's schools. And thereby families have not used this information and the recommendations issued by the platform to demand a more effective management from the school and the state government authorities. But we believe that if we, as a civic society organization with a very small team, all of our network does not comprise more than 30 collaborators, with a very limited budget and with a very limited access to data, if we were able to create a tool to organize the process of school reopenings on data, I believe that this is an opportunity access that most governments can access, and is definitely a very interesting avenue for greater levels of innovation. And if we move to the next slide, we will get to the third dimension, which has to do with how decisions were made during the crisis. And I will address how transforming schools into community learning centers in Sinaloa became a very good opportunity to innovate in the way that decisions were traditionally made in schools in Mexico. So Mexico has a very centralized education system. First, national authorities make pretty much all of the policy, all the relevant decisions. In some cases, that decision is shared with local state governments, but pretty much the role of school communities is to follow what national or local authorities tell them to do, right? And there have been some attempts to democratize this, to increase, participation from parental associations, or to allow schools to determine a portion of its curriculum locally. But this is more, both of these are more administrative possibilities than things that schools are actually really doing in their everyday life. And for instance, the decision to close schools was a decision completely made by the federal government, a centralized decision made by the federal government on March 2020. However, the decision to reopen schools was granted to schools as a voluntary decision. And that created a very important window of opportunity because there was not a guideline, there was not a ready-made process for communities to make that decision. So what we saw is that communities value different things to decide whether to reopen their schools or not. First, I want to explain what a community learning center is, and there are some publications there. Unfortunately, the most important of those publications is in Spanish in Mexicanos Primero's website, but there is a chapter on this book on an educational calamity where we show some of the most important consultancy aspects that made us suggest to the state government of Sinaloa to design and implement this strategy. And a community learning center is basically a school that receives authorization to operate under a strict set of restrictions, like a shorter schedule, like lower levels of daily attendance, to provide academic and socio-emotional support for students that do not have adequate conditions to access remote learning instruction. And this modality of schooling through community learning centers transferred the decision to reopen schools to communities. This, in many ways, allowed to bypass the low political willingness to reopen schools that politicians and teacher unions had, which was a very important barrier where in all of the process where Mexicanos Primero Sinaloa was trying to get schools to reopen. And this had to do with the fact that last year we had local government and local parliament elections in Sinaloa, right? So by making the decision volunteer, decision makers sort of said, this is not our responsibility. You go ahead and decide, which is rare, because as I said, most decisions are made so centrally. But not only in terms of decision making, the COVID pandemic brought new opportunities for innovation. Because if we move to the next slide, through this methodology, through this intervention of schools transformed into community learning centers, we were also able to see ways in which in-person schooling was different from traditional in-person schooling during the pandemic, despite all of these restrictions, despite all of these constraints. And these ideas are expressed in a chapter on this book, edited recently by UNESCO. And I will only mention some of those ideas. For instance, the fact that schools were operating with lower levels of attendance allowed a more personalized support to be delivered to students. And this is a kind of support that means a more closely tailored approach based on the specific needs of each student. And this is something completely different from what students typically get on a regular in-person school day in Mexico. It's difficult to accomplish because a teacher is now working with 4 or 5 students during a 2-hour period instead of working with 40 or 45 students during the same time span. So it's a dramatic difference. Second, schools as community learning centers were allowed to balance, to have a greater prioritization of socio-emotional needs of learners. So it's not about pure academics now. It's also about what's going on with children's mental health, with their emotional and social development and competencies. And this might seem like something that was already going on before the pandemic, but if you looked at most national education evaluation systems, there were only a few of them which were actually making sure to measure, to track students' socio-emotional learning and development as a priority. And I think that the pandemic definitely shifted that. And finally, parental engagement. A critical process, like reopening school, is now allowing parents to participate in decision-making, in decisions that are relevant in schools. And I believe that that creates also great innovation opportunities to increase the quality, to increase the level of importance of the partnerships between families and schools. And by the way, this is a great book because you will find innovative practices from a vast array of countries, focusing on different categories, student-centered modes of instruction, deeper learning, social-emotional learning and well-being, teacher and principal professional development, and family engagement. So I definitely recommend checking this book out for anybody who is interested in exploring the types of innovation that occurred globally during these times of disruptions. And finally, there are other institutions such as the OECD or the Brookings institutions that have also published systematized reports on the types of innovations that have emerged spontaneously across education systems through the world. So finally, if we move to the last slide of my presentation, what does the future and the post-pandemic scenario has to offer in terms of innovation? Next slide, please. I think I wanna leave us with this recommendation. Recently, the UNESCO published this report, this third very important report about the futures of education, where they make a clear statement about the necessity for greater levels of innovation across different dimensions to be pursued. They believe that in order to renew the way we understand and we enact the role of education in our societies, we need to reimagine the futures of our education in a way that is interconnected, in a way that is globally pursued. And I believe that this is finally a very interesting avenue for innovation. This book is based on two foundational principles. The first one is that now when we talk about the right to quality education, this should be a right through life, not only to K-12, not only to K-12 and higher ed, but beyond, through all of our lifespan. And the second foundational principle is that education should be strengthened as a public endeavor and as a common good, as a shared social endeavor, which allow us to build common purposes and enable individuals and communities to flourish together. And this create, again, new, very interesting pathways for innovation to happen in the way we make decisions and drive change collectively. So with this recommendation, I will finish my presentation so that we can have time to receive maybe a couple of questions or comments from the audience. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir, for such an engaging discussion and enlightening us with your wonderful thoughts. So we have a few questions for you from our participants. So the first question is, what are the motivational factors that can be taken into consideration for the learners as well as the educators in this pandemic situation? This has been asked by Mr. Pratik N.
Thank you very much for that question. I think that that question touches a very important point, which is how important it is for education systems to engage students as key drivers of the decisions, because students are the ones that know the best the type of things that motivate them. We've been able and we've been lucky enough to talk with many students across different schools and regions within the country, and they are able to identify so many ways in which this disruption has been also positive for them. Let me talk briefly about two of them. So many of them are saying, by working more time independently, we are able to experience learning at a different pacing, at a pacing that we feel like we benefit more from. So they would feel, the students would tell us that traditional schooling was set up in a pace that was not necessarily always challenging for them. And this was different when they had more capacity to be able to define their own pacing, their own rhythm, their own topics of interest. And I believe that that's absolutely fundamental. And the second thing is how not attending to school every day with a long school schedule also allows students to develop other interests, to develop other talents. We have learned that for students, not the most relevant learnings of these times have not necessarily had to do with the national curriculum, but we're learning things that are useful and helpful in their everyday life, like skating, or like learning how to cook, or how to ride a bicycle, or how to ride a motorcycle, which are things that make sense, that are relevant in the type of life experiences they have in their communities. So I believe that the greatest motivators should come from children and from student experience directly.
Thank you so much, sir, for clarifying our participants' doubts through your in-depth knowledge. It's been indeed a pleasure to listen to your valuable views. Your spontaneous views on the innovation opportunities that COVID-19 brought to education system is quite relatable to all of us, as we all belong to the academic field. We are thankful to you for sharing lots of things with us, what you explored during this pandemic and in this academic structure. So I'm sure all of us are going to have a better understanding from now onwards about the current educational system post-pandemic. Thank you once again for spending your time for all of us. Thank you. Thank you once again, sir. Over to Professor Baisakhi.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so
Take care.
much. Bye.
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 Thank you, Professor Sunil. And before we move ahead to our acclaimed and illustrious speaker, I would like to acknowledge the presence of our respected Vice Chancellor, Dr. Raj Singh. And on this note, I would like to invite our head of the department, Professor Sunita Bige, to introduce our next speaker of the session. Over to Professor Sunita.
Thank you, Baishakhi ma'am. Thank you so much. Namaste to everybody. Here, I refer to former US President Bill Clinton, who once said, in the new economy, information, education, motivation are everything. And an amalgamation of all these three aspects are truly reflected in a dynamic personality who is going to address us today for this session. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure for Center for Management Studies, Jane Dumtuby University, to bring to you Bruce Kingma. As we know, Dr. Kingma is a leading educator, researcher in entrepreneurship, economic development, online education, the economics of information, library science, and nonprofit management. He is a professor of entrepreneurship with joint appointments in the School of Information Studies, the iSchool, Whiteman School of Management at Syracuse University. He is a former associate provost for entrepreneurship and innovation and a former associate dean in iSchool. Professor Kingma has held various academic appointments at Syracuse University, the University of Texas at El Paso, Victorian University of Wellington, to name a few. Provost Kingma transformed entrepreneurship education at Syracuse University to focus on helping students, war veterans, faculty, and community members to start ventures. He has worked with faculty across campuses to create experiential, discipline-focused programs in entrepreneurship education. This Syracuse model of experiential focused entrepreneurship increased the annual enrollment for e-courses to over 7,500 students, produce over 100 new student ventures annually, resulted in top 10 national ranking in entrepreneurship education in Forbes, US News, the Princeton Review, the Entrepreneurship Magazine, the Bloomberg, and the Business Week. In 2012, President Obama invited Dr. Kingma to speak at the White House for National Summit for Entrepreneurship Education. Kingma led Syracuse University Scholarship in Action Initiative, connecting to campus to community in economic development. Scholarship in Action program raised $350 million in funding for Near West Side Initiative, the Connective Corridor, the South Side Innovation Center, the energy innovations. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a very brief note. I would like to welcome Professor Kingma. I also like to tell you, Professor Kingma is a founder of award-winning Syracuse Student Sandbox, an incubator, accelerator, and curriculum that helps students in upstate New York startup ventures. He's a founder of Global Sandbox, an innovative partnership between universities in China, India, Kenya, Ukraine, and Syracuse universities that support students from around the world in starting global micro multinational ventures. Professor Kingma is a founder of award-winning WISE Consortium, the first international consortium of universities in online education. In 2002, Syracuse University and 12 other universities from around the globe came together to share online classes and training programs in information education. Dear sir, I convey my heartfelt gratitude to you for accepting our invitation. It's an absolute honor, privilege to welcome you, sir, as our esteemed speaker. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much for that introduction. I'm really pleased and humbled, and thank you for inviting me to give this opportunity to talk at your summit. And of course, I'd like to thank Chancellor Roychand and Vice Chancellor Singh and Dr. Nilkant and Dr. Agarwal for inviting me and for being part of this. It just looks like a thrilling opportunity that you have. And I think you can tell from that introduction that what I'm going to talk about, I've had a lot of global experience, but you know, most of what I've done has been at Syracuse University. And what I'm going to talk about is the impact that we've had really over the last 20 years at Syracuse University with entrepreneurship education, an impact on the community, an impact at the university. And maybe there's lessons learned there. I always preface it by saying, this is one instance at one university that I think we've done good work at. And maybe there's lessons learned for other universities that want to get involved in entrepreneurship education or community engagement. And, I've been honored to be part of a really great team of faculty and students and staff and funders that have helped make this possible. Now it's an arc of 20 years. It's a story of 20 years. I've written a book that talk about some of those experiences, but I love to give talks where I can update what we've been doing with our community engagement, our entrepreneurship education, and our lens on this and how we can make a difference in a community. So I hopefully can do a screen share. Let me try this, and I know you can be seeing yourself, but hopefully in a second you'll see my deck. Can I get a thumbs up?
It's there, sir.
You can see my deck? Okay, fantastic, fantastic. So this is really about academic. I call myself an academic entrepreneur because for well over 30 years, I'm a professor, I have a PhD, I've been engaging as a professor, as a teacher, and a researcher. But at the same time, I've always felt strongly about starting innovative programs and getting things done. And this was an amazing experience at Syracuse that happened over a period of years. As I was introduced, I'm a professor in the School of Information Studies and also in the Whitman School of Management at Syracuse. And the School of Information Studies is this odd school. It always takes somebody to explain it. We call it the iSchool, and I always compare it to the iPhone because it is about networked connections. These schools were born in the age of the internet, and they continue to look at everything within the domain of IT management. I know at some universities, there's an MIS program within a School of Business, and really that MIS program resides in the School of Information Studies outside the business school at Syracuse. And what I want to talk to you about is this experience that we went through really to some extent over the last 20 years, but the real critical points were 2007 to 2013. A lot of this is described in my book, Academic Entrepreneurship and Community Engagement. It's actually a series of chapters written by faculty and others who have had an impact or had an impact with their particular projects. But let me, if you don't mind, I'll sort of give you the agenda along with a little history lesson about Syracuse. So pre-2007, we really had three programs that related to entrepreneurship and innovation. We had a major in our business school, and it was a good major. It was a department in the business school, a little bit unusual, and it had an impact among the handful of students that were studying it in the business school. We had a program in the College of Law that looked at intellectual property and innovation and the legal protection around patents and trademarks and things like that. Again, somewhat isolated, its own little program. And then we also had a center that helped faculty, particularly in engineering, commercialize some of their initiatives, right? Not very big, small, again, just sort of three independent units at the university that never really talked to each other. Well, what happened in 2007, and really we wrote the grant application in 2006, is I was awarded what's called a Kauffman Campus Initiative from the Kauffman Foundation. We were one of 18 universities to have received this funding. It was $3 million from the Kauffman Foundation. So a nice chunk of funding to help us get started. We decided that whenever you apply for funding from a foundation, you got to do something different. You can't just say, we're going to have more entrepreneurship and innovation education at our university. Instead, what we decided to do is that we were going to have more, but we were going to have an impact on our community. And that impact was going to be, what we talk about is experiential education. We're going to provide opportunities for students to start ventures, but we were also going to provide opportunities for community members to start new businesses and for students to help out. And we were going to provide opportunities for faculty and staff to also sort of experience this and make a difference. And I do want to say, I should give you a little bit of background, that Syracuse University, the city of Syracuse, pardon me, is really, it's part of what's called the Rust Belt in the United States. And that's not a flattering term. That extends from Syracuse all the way around to Detroit, with cities that, you know, were real economic engines for the United States from, you know, from the period really of the mid 1800s until about 1950, but had lost some of their, you know, economic drivers, let's say. And so we were also looking to make a difference in a community that needed a difference made. Many of the larger industries had moved out, had relocated elsewhere. We weren't manufacturing anymore. So we knew there was a need for what we were going to do. We couldn't do it alone. And so we partnered with 5 other universities. Now, we were always in the central New York area. Now, these are schools and colleges you probably haven't heard of because they're significantly smaller than Syracuse University. But we didn't want to try and do it alone. It was a teamwork approach, and brought in these other schools to help, as well as community partners, getting them on board with what we were going to try to do. And then we're also going to talk a little bit about post-2013. And what I mean by that is a lot of this depended on me getting this grant, a chancellor that was supportive of this initiative, a prior chancellor. But, you know, chancellors and provosts and associate provosts don't stay in their terms forever. They are in a term for a while and then exit that. And the chancellor stepped down and I stepped down from my position. So what happened after 2013? Well, despite the fact that that leadership changed, we put in place a number of initiatives that continued to live on. And I'm really proud of the fact that they continue to live on, maybe in different forms, slightly different, but the impact has been considerable, which I'm going to talk a little bit about also. All right, so you heard the introduction about who I am. This is a picture of me, obviously without a beard. I've been on these, in the wintertime, I tend to grow a beard to keep my face warm. The other thing about Syracuse, it's very cold in the winter. So a beard helps a little bit. I was, you know, pleased to be one of, I think it was 50 individuals from around the United States to be invited to the Obama White House to talk about entrepreneurship. The Obama White House had a significant initiative in helping businesses get started, and we were part of that from universities on the education side. I have helped out other universities over a number of years working with them on their entrepreneurship program. There's something called the Syracuse model of entrepreneurship that a lot of universities, you know, sort of employ, enjoy, and have emulated. I've also started a number of businesses. The most significant one was actually Kingma Inc., which is a business that my wife and I ran for many years. She has since retired. It was an interior design company in central New York that was very successful. And as was noted in my introduction, I've got a number of publications on these areas, including the book I just referenced about what we did during those times from 2007 to 2013. So what did we do? Let's go back a little bit again, pre-2007. There was a Department of Emerging Entrepreneurship and Emerging Enterprises in the School of Management. We had a introductory course that attracted 650 students a semester, which is pretty good. Syracuse University is a university of about 24,000 students. Of that, about 17,000 students are undergraduates. And of that, about 2,000 are in the business school. So attracting 650 students a semester is pretty good. We also had this College of Law Center on Innovation, New York State Science and Technology Law Center, which received funding from New York State in order to help, businesses with intellectual property protect that intellectual property and potentially grow it commercially. And of course, it's out of the law school, so lawyers looking at that. And then, as I mentioned, we had the Center for Advanced Systems and Engineering, which was really a center to help faculty in engineering commercialize some of their businesses. So each of these programs were great programs, but as I said before, they were isolated. They were simply part of the university. So really in 2006, we started the program in 2007. We got a $3 million grant from the Ewing and Marion Kauffman Foundation. It's a very competitive grant process. Universities across the United States were trying to get the funding awarded to them. And we had a really unique spin because so many of the universities were simply looking at starting classes in entrepreneurship to help and innovation to help their students learn how to start ventures or learn about entrepreneurship. And we had a bigger agenda. We wanted to make a difference with the community. And the only way to do that is to partner with the community and partner with other local universities in the upstate New York area. Now, it's important to distinguish between what we call radiant and magnet programs of entrepreneurship. And I have a publication on this with a co-author out of Cornell University, that when you build these entrepreneurship programs that are cross-campus and sometimes cross-community, they can be radiant programs or they can be magnet programs. What does that mean? Well, a radiant program means that you're seeding this education and these initiatives in many schools and colleges and within the community and letting those seeds grow, right? And bear fruit. Whereas a magnet program is a program that sits typically in the School of Business, and then everybody that wants to do entrepreneurship comes to the School of Business or School of Management to learn about entrepreneurship education or to learn about starting ventures. University of Indiana in the United States has what we know as a magnet program. Everything is out of the School of Business. I would say the same for the University of Southern California. Whereas at Syracuse, we decided that we were going to go radiant. We were going to empower, right, individuals, regardless of school and college, to create their own courses and to create their own programs with our funding, with our help, but they had to have ownership over these things. And you can see why. And I think that decision has led to a very strong continuation of our programs after 2013. So what did we create? Well, we created what I call the Syracuse University Entrepreneurial Ecosystem. We actually funded 160 different initiatives across central New York, right? So it was basically a 6-year period. 3 of those years we were providing funding. Basically the $3 million from the Kauffman Foundation was sent out to individual programs. Those individuals would apply for funding. We'd look at their application. We probably had about 300 applications and funded 160 initiatives. We funded initiatives to support student entrepreneurship, faculty innovation, and community engagement. And so on the student side, we developed a new accelerator and a new initiative focusing on students starting ventures, right? Whether they be business or nonprofit ventures. And in a little while, I'll show you a video of some of the great ventures that got started. So you won't have to just hear me talk. Business plan competitions, entrepreneurship clubs for students, and many other initiatives that were student-centered. We also funded initiatives that were faculty-centered, supporting faculty innovation so that the university could support faculty to innovate more, to create new commercialized product ideas. And then finally, we also funded a lot of community engagement. Remember, half of our partners were from the community, and it was important to us to have an impact on the city of Syracuse in central New York. So we went into some of the most economically challenged areas of the city of Syracuse, the near west side of Syracuse, principally a Hispanic population, that was economically disadvantaged that we wanted to help. Started great initiatives there. The south side of Syracuse, principally an African-American Black community that was also economically disadvantaged. And we worked with the community individuals that were provided leadership there, some pastors, some other individuals, in order to start a center there to help individuals start businesses. Also the north side of Syracuse, which is predominantly an immigrant population, many from Afghanistan and Iraq, given the still relatively recent conflicts in those countries, as well as other countries, and supporting initiatives there. So it was a full court press, a full expression of what we wanted to do. But remember, each and every time, it's not me doing it. It's me providing the funding. And sometimes I called myself the angel investor on entrepreneurship, providing the funding to individuals to let them get really great ideas started. Okay. And you'll see some more examples. I know you want more stories on those great ideas, and I'll give you those stories in just a minute. In fact, here it is. I am hoping that you'll be able to hear this. So I'm going to share the sound, and this is just some of the things that we did during those years, many of which continue to this day. You let me know somehow if you cannot hear this. Now I'm a little frightened that you're not going to be able to hear this, but hopefully you will.
There's nothing more important to America's future than entrepreneurship. It really is the heart of what makes us special.
Entrepreneurs are one of the great engines of our economy. And right now, we need them more than ever to build businesses, create jobs.
It means finding something you love and saying, I want to build it my own way, my own path. And it's the spirit of what this country's all about.
Learning about entrepreneurship has done more than change my life. It's really defined my life.
My name is Ryan Dickerson. I'm a junior at Syracuse University, and I designed an ergonomic bolster that can make any flat surface into a comfortable couch. We were featured as one of the coolest college startups in 2010 in Inc. magazine.
The name of our company is SafeSip Technologies, and what we're doing is developing a drinking straw that changes colors in the presence of a date rape drug. We've been working really hard, but it doesn't even seem like work when you're so passionate about what you're doing.
We are infusing entrepreneurship throughout Central New York and throughout Syracuse University. We're encouraging our student entrepreneurs to get ventures started and to work with local entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurship is everywhere in Central New York.
So the name of our company is Squeeze My Tees, and we offer niche, edgy t-shirt designs for the Syracuse students.
We started a company called Cape Squared. It's a web services company. We build online software and we do web design.
The name of my company is The Front, and what we're looking to do is revitalizing the face of downtown Syracuse.
We are Graph Fighters, and we are the first online game for your hand-drawn character.
I get to hear a new idea every day. There's a freshness about students. They're not afraid to tell you this kooky idea.
The Accelerator is an effort by Syracuse University to help student ventures get started. It includes coursework, it includes an entrepreneur in residence, it includes mentorships and funding, and at the end of the year we have our great conference called Emerging Talk. Emerging Talk is a showcase for student venture owners. They're able to win awards and funding for their ventures.
We got the idea for Brand Yourself when we saw our friends and our colleagues losing job opportunities because of what was out there about them online when employers searched for them when they went in before interviews. So we created a platform that makes it really easy for them to manage how they're perceived online.
There's definitely been a cultural change at Syracuse University since the Kauffman Initiative started.
In our first year, we had to knock down faculty doors and convince them that they were entrepreneurial and to come on board with the initiative. And in a short year, they were coming to us.
Entrepreneurship is not necessarily a word that was in my vocabulary before I came here and before I was involved in these programs.
Our Kaufman Foundation funded initiative exemplifies what we're striving to accomplish at Syracuse University today. We're leveraging our strengths with those of colleagues at partner institutions and across the public, private, and nonprofit sectors to show our students what it takes to tackle real-world challenges.
I want to go into entertainment law. So I have a combination of the band year program for the music industry, and then I'm also a dual major in Newhouse in television, radio, and film. It's one of the only programs in the country that combine the music industry with entrepreneurship and communications.
Here at Syracuse University at the Falk Center for Sports Management, entrepreneurship will energize our young people to understand that we need to find a whole new generation of bright young people to reinvent the business.
Syracuse University gave me that opportunity to work with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, because if I wouldn't have been in this program, I wouldn't have had the drive and the motivation to go out there and look for anything like this.
An entrepreneurial mindset is critical for artists and designers. And when they start working on entrepreneurial projects, they see their things in practice, that they become realities. They feel very empowered by it.
This university has so often formed partnerships to make sure that the knowledge that's developed here is spread across the world and is used for the improvement of the human conditions.
What we do is make the drugs that exist much better. We are utilizing the protective uptake pathway for vitamin B12 to actually carry insulin through the stomach, across the intestine, into the bloodstream, thereby allowing us to have an oral insulin. We're going to save lives.
We feel that the new polymers we're making for tissue engineering could have a huge impact on the way medical technology is deployed. We will not be satisfied until there's technologies in doctors' hands for tissue engineering, for the repair of injuries, for the repair of congenital defects.
The Center of Excellence encourages green entrepreneurship across New York State.
We bring together companies and universities so that people have intellectual collisions and they come up with new ideas for new products and services. And we accelerate those ideas into the marketplace.
We're trying to train a new generation of students, lawyers, engineers, scientists, MBA students, who really understand the nature of technology commercialization and how to work with entrepreneurs in bringing new technologies to market.
You really need to de-risk your idea, and the Science and Technology Law Center helps us do that, so we can be assured that we have a good idea that will affect the market positively.
Syracuse University has been involved in many local major initiatives, getting our students involved in entrepreneurship and stimulating the Central New York economy.
The Near West Side Initiative is a community-based project that uses the power of art, technology, and innovation to revitalize the 9th poorest census tract in the United States of America. The Kaufman Initiative has brought entrepreneurial students into the Near West Side and helped us by renovating a former drug house into an arts and literacy center, revitalizing a community-based theater, and establishing with our law school a green property management company that will actually be run by the residents of the neighborhood.
The Burton Blatt Institute is very fortunate to be the only institute of its kind to be selected to develop a program called Startup New York, which is just to foster small business innovation and entrepreneurship in New York State for people with disabilities.
They worked with me to figure out my business plan, my financials. I was able to receive a grant. It brought back my self-esteem. I'm not embarrassed that I've been disabled.
Women in general are just waiting to explode on the scene. The WISE Symposium. This year it attracted 1,000 women. We do training and workshops, guidance, financing. It's amazing what support and networking do for someone.
The Entrepreneurship Bootcamp for Veterans is a program that helps disabled veterans as entrepreneurs get businesses started.
There was an opportunity to leverage what we do well here at the Whitman School to serve those who have served all of us.
And we just keep saying thank you, thank you, thank you. But the greatest thanks, of course, is to make a success of ourselves.
The first class we put through in 2007, it was a class of 20 veterans. Today, 17 of the 20 have businesses. 4 of those 17 in 2009 did more than $1 million in revenue.
Entrepreneurship really, for me, is a journey in self-awareness and how I can work with other people to make our vision a reality.
If you're able to come up with a niche idea and develop it into something that you can call your own, there's nothing like it else in the world.
When you're an entrepreneur, you are inventing, you are creating, and you are making a mark on society. And you get a chance to look back and say, that's mine, I did it. And that's where that fire comes from.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that, and I learned a little bit more. I think it's always better to hear about the stories from the individuals that lives were impacted by those stories. And every one of those, as I see every one of those individuals, I think, yep, we made a difference there. Yep, we made a difference there. Yep, we made a difference there. Now, oddly enough, you know, some of the individuals that you saw, their programs have become wildly successful and really amazing. And many of the students that you saw, one of the students that you saw, his company, he graduated in 2013. His company called Cape Squared went on for a number of years, and it was a good company. It was doing well for him. But then he hit it on an idea called density, and his company is now worth well over $1 billion. So he just graduated 9 years ago now, and has done extremely well for himself. Yeah. So we did run, I know that this conference is about community initiatives and the difference you can make in a community. And you see some of those community initiatives. This links to other additional videos, but I don't think we want to spend the time because I do want to provide a little bit of time for Q&A. Making a difference in these communities. And every one of these, it's not just the initiative, it's the person that I see that provided leadership. Right? I worked with them, provided funding to them, talked to them about what they wanted to do, and they provided leadership in making a difference on the near west side of Syracuse, on the south side of Syracuse, for veterans. And our veterans program is now national in the United States. There are 10 universities that participate in that entrepreneurship bootcamp for veterans. And we have the National Center now for innovation in veterans families. We have an amazing program to help out women entrepreneurs. And then we have what we call the Connective Corridor, which actually connects many of our non-governmental, nonprofit organization in the arts and museums to allow people to experience the great art and culture that we have in Central New York. So I always get asked, and this is part of the book, what does it take to build these initiatives? And I always answer, well, first, start with a radiant program. Start with the idea that you're going to invest in others. You're not going to do it all yourself. You're going to invest in good ideas, right? So what does that mean? Well, you need individuals with big ideas. It's always foolish to say I can do something alone. It's always much wiser to say, hey, I can do something as a team. And by the way, some other individuals might have much better ideas than I do. So you're looking for those big ideas. For each idea, I was always looking for a faculty champion, meaning that, you know, I would take applications from teams or ideas, but I had to have the one person that was going to be responsible for bringing that idea to life and really was going to put their effort behind it. That's what made the difference. Each individual that applied for funding from this larger initiative had to show a sustainable business model. They had to show how after I gave them initial funding, whether that was $10,000, $20,000, $50,000, $100,000,
how that was going to continue well after that money ran out. Where were they going to get additional funding from? Next, we're a university. Syracuse is a university. We're trying to make a difference in a community, but every initiative had to have some form of student engagement, right? Whether it was specifically for students or in the community and students were involved in that experience. We were always looking for a community partner. So what you're doing, you're not doing alone, you're doing to try and make a difference in upstate New York. Who is going to partner with you on this, right? It's extremely, and then in the book, I talk about the first 5, but I think there were 2 more significant factors in our success. One is having university leadership behind it. And Chancellor Nancy Cantor, who you saw a brief video of, she's no longer chancellor at Syracuse University, but she was behind this initiative in a very big way. And having the resources to get it done. So it's not enough to have your chancellor or your president looking to, be the spiritual leader. You need some funding, and we were thrilled to get the funding from the Kauffman Foundation. Now, a little known trick is part of the application process. To me, how we pulled this off is I told everybody, for every $1 I'm going to give you, you show me where you're going to get $5 from somewhere else. And that small trick led individuals who were looking at building these initiatives to seek additional funding. And that small trick led our $3 million to turn into $350 million of other funding that really provided the resources to get done what we needed to get done in our community. All right, so, I'm a data person. And I always look at the numbers about the impact that we had. And, we had about 2,000 students enrolled in courses before this initiative. We went up to about 2,800. No longer have a centrally managed initiative. Now all those seeds that we put out grew their own fruit, grew their own resources. And so the student enrollment has gone down a little bit, but we're no longer infusing cash into the system either. We needed those to be self-sustaining, and having 7,000 students in programs, I'm still very proud of. We increased the number of courses on entrepreneurship and innovation dramatically. We increased the number of programs. We increased the number of student clubs. We increased the number of community incubators, as well as the student incubators, right? These are these programs where if you have a starting business idea or nonprofit idea, NGO idea, you can go into an incubator and they will give you the space and the time in order to make it even better and bigger, and the mentorship too. We dramatically increased our number of student business plan competitions and increased what I call our signature programs. These are programs that we're known for well outside of Syracuse in terms of making a difference in the lives of our students and in the community. So by the numbers, it's important to me to not only sort of build a phenomenal program, what I called a team of teams. In other words, every one of these 160 programs from Outer had its own team running it. And so we had a team of teams where we were supporting each other. But then after our funding ended with the Kauffman Foundation, because they weren't going to give us funding forever, right? Having a series of independent programs that still collaborated with each other, but had an independent source of funding. And we did that. It was in the blood at Syracuse University, entrepreneurship and innovation. Somebody told me entrepreneurship and innovation is in the blood at Syracuse University, and that's why you guys are so successful with it. So in terms of those signature initiatives, let me just give you a couple of stories about the signature initiatives, and then I can answer questions that you might have about these. Well, one is the Blackstone Launchpad. So after we received the large funding from the Kauffman Foundation and a lot of funding from other sources, we also received a $1 million grant from the Blackstone Foundation. And that $1 million grant allowed us to set up a site, a program within our library. And I don't know about your institution, but at universities in the United States, the library is this nice sort of neutral territory. I call it Switzerland of the universities, meaning that it's a group that always stays neutral, because the individual schools and colleges compete for resources, right? Compete with the president, compete with each other to try and harvest those resources. The library is this nice independent place. And so we were able to secure a $1 million grant from the Blackstone Foundation to set up a site at the library where we could mentor students, coach students, and have programming for students, and run all of our business plan competitions out of, regardless of who was funding that business plan competition. Works out extremely well, run by a very good friend of mine now. You know, has continued that heritage at Syracuse University of supporting about 100 student ventures every year now. So about 100 student ventures that usually constitutes about 250 students participating in those ventures, and some amazing ventures that have come out of the program. So one of the signature programs that has happened after the end of the central program, funded by the Kauffman Foundation, is the Blackstone Launchpad for students. You can go to the Blackstone Foundation site and find out more. They also funded, I think, about a dozen launch pads at different universities around the United States. And we were pleased to get one of those grants, and it continues. That grant has run out, but it continues to thrive, survive and thrive at our university library, in large part because our library dean, the head of the library, has a lot of belief in it and feels strongly about it too. Another signature program that grew out of this initiative is what I call the Immersions in Innovation. And this is a set of trips that we provide for students. There are now close to 11 trips. Now, unfortunately, for the last 2 years, given this global pandemic, we have not been doing these trips for the last 2 years, but we are building them again to start them up again in the fall of 2022. It is my belief, it is my hope, it is my prayer that our students at Syracuse University can get back to traveling internationally to take advantage of these trips. Well, what kind of trips are these? Well, what we do is we leverage our strong alumni network and our friend network in order to take students for anywhere from a weekend to 3 weeks within the United States or various parts of the world to look at innovation within those communities, right? So we have things called Eurotech, which obviously is 3 weeks in Europe, Asia Tech, 3 weeks in a variety of countries in Asia, Innovate Ireland, Innovate Israel, Spring Break in Silicon Valley. The list goes on, and we usually take anywhere from 15 to 30 students on these trips so they can learn about innovation elsewhere. Innovation is not a local phenomenon, it's a global phenomenon. And it is so important for our students not to think that innovation just occurs in central New York. That would be silly and that would be foolish. And that's why we have these trips, to make certain they get a much more global perspective on innovation. So we're beginning to rebuild these trips for the fall of 2022. They were incredibly popular prior to the pandemic. And I'm sort of looking forward to taking more trips around the world with our Syracuse University students. I have to say that in part, this was, you had heard mention earlier, something called the Global Sandbox. And for a couple of years, we tried to online run what was known as the Global Sandbox, which included students from Tsinghua University, Kiev Polytechnic University, Jomo Kenyatta University in Nairobi, Kenya, Syracuse University, and also a university in India, Ahmedabad University, where students from all 5 institutions worked with each other to start global, what I called micro multinational ventures. That was very successful, but I have to say it was very exhausting for me. The overhead was very high. And I was recently, about 2 years ago, appointed undergraduate program directors. And I'd be honest with you, I simply didn't have the time to continue running it. Here is my email address if you need to talk to me some more. There are so many stories I can tell. I gave you just a small snippet of what we've done with our initiatives in Central New York. to not only provide opportunities for our students to be innovative and start ventures, but also provide an impact within our communities, whether that's a local community or a community of veterans in the United States, or a community of women entrepreneurs or others. That has worked out very well for us. I can't say these lessons extend themselves to everybody at every university, at every institution, but I can sort of offer the story of Syracuse University and the impact we were able to make. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing, and I don't know if there are any
Yes, sir. Yes.
questions.
Yeah. So thank you so much, sir, for this engaging discussion and enlightening us with your wonderful thoughts. We have some questions from participants. So we'll take, yeah. So the first question comes from Ms. Beena. Education can help students cross hills, but what can help students help climb their mountains later?
That's it's a good question. And what I talk to students about with our programs is that, there are one of two outcomes for you, right? So if you go into a program that has experiential education as part of it, and in this case, I'm really talking about experiential entrepreneurship education, although we can have this conversation about other experiential forms of education. So what do we do at Syracuse? We help a student start a venture, okay? Out of every 100 student ventures we start, there's usually one that either achieves $1 million in revenue or receives $1 million of investment, okay? And that's great. And that student is on their way to the next level. But that also means there are 99 student teams that did not, right? And what I talk to students about is this is a great experience that you can put on your resume, and it makes a difference in terms of you finding employment too. And I've got so many stories along these lines. My favorite story is a young woman who was in our program who started a venture. I thought her idea was terrible, and she knows I thought her idea was terrible. I was very supportive of our idea. It ended up being a really phenomenal idea. It was one of these sort of, commercial ideas that provided funding to nonprofit organizations. It ended up being a great idea, but she was only making about $40,000, $50,000 a year from it. And that wasn't, she was looking for something more because many of her classmates were getting jobs that they were making a lot more money than that. But what happened from this idea is that Facebook noticed her, right? And they hired her. She's got a great job working for Facebook now, has been promoted a number of times. And she attributes it back to the fact that, hey, she started that idea. It was a good idea. It got the attention of an employer. It became a great conversation starter within the interview. And it led to her being a job. And not only that, Facebook looks at individuals like this. I mean, all the great companies look at individuals like this and say, hey, you're a self-starter, you're motivated, you're willing to look outside the box. That's exactly the kind of person we want to hire. So there are two paths for experiential education, both of them enabling students to climb the mountain, whether they start their own business or whether they work for a company. So.
Yeah, thank you so much, sir. So the next question comes from Mr. D.S. Ray. He asked, how will you make sure that values are reflected in the community engagement process?
I'm not certain I completely understand the question.
Should I repeat it, sir?
No, but I values. Values of the university reflected in the community engagement. Well, and I do want to say this, we made an important point that we're not doing things to the community, we're doing things with the community. And that community partners on any initiative had to be partners, equal partners that were involved in the decision-making and involved in the project itself. I made a big deal about that. I thought that was extremely important. And quite frankly, it was the only way to be successful. Once you start doing things to the community, right, they understand that you're being parental, that you're being, I know better than you, and immediately they're not interested in working with you. So I think we did a good job with that. And that's, you know, part of that is just sort of reinforcing those values as you're funding individuals who are going to start projects. So I hope that answered the question.
Yes, sir. Sure, sir. The next question comes from Professor Mary Jose. Is there any advice for educators to increase their risk appetite for course development, be an academic entrepreneur?
Yeah, so that's a really tricky question, right? Because you're right, it is. Faculty had to provide leadership to every one of these initiatives because the money was coming through the university. And so it was required for the faculty member to be the lead on any project. And you're right, faculty had to show some risk. They had to be willing to do that and take the time, take the time to sort of do that risk. That's where the university leadership was important, that this was going to participation and trying to do this was going to be a factor in tenure and promotion at Syracuse University. So you got credit for engaging in this, right? Whether it was successful or failed, you got credit with the university that led to tenure, that led to promotion, that led to salary increases. And that was extremely important. Some faculty, I'll tell you the story of the Veterans Initiative, which was interesting. The then dean of the School of Business told me, this is great, this is phenomenal, we want you to do this, but don't fund any of the tenure track assistant professors. And, you know, at Syracuse University, you have 6 years to get tenure, which is a lifetime job. During those 6 years, you're supposed to do a lot of research, get a lot of publications, and that leads towards tenure. And clearly, if you're engaged in a community initiative that's taking time away, potentially, from your publications, from your research. So the dean of the School of Business said, whatever you do, don't fund any of my tenure track assistant professors, but fund all the people that already have tenure. Most of the faculty already have tenure, fund those faculty, right? Then what happened is an assistant professor came to see me and said, and you saw him in that video, Professor Mike Haney, who is now a provost at Syracuse University in his own right. And I funded his project. It was a terrible thing, terrible story. I funded his project and I said, whatever you do, don't tell your dean, because I've already promised him that I wouldn't fund it. But one, Mike, I know you're going to get tenure. You've got a phenomenal research profile. And two, I really believe in this initiative, which was the initiative he spoke about in the video of bringing 20 veterans to Syracuse to give them training in entrepreneurship to help them start ventures. That led to that single summer program led to over $100 million being donated to Syracuse University to help with veterans initiatives. And so it proved itself. The dean of the business school was not happy with me at one point, but now he was, then after that, he became more than happy with me as it proved to be so successful. So you're right, there is a risk factor among faculty. You've got to look at every individual faculty and see what their risk factor is. And, you know, to talk to them about how, you know, how we might want to get these things started to make a difference. So.
Thank you so much, sir. So one last question from Mr. Vineet. He wants to know about 4 most important ingredients to start community service.
Oh,
What
the 4
are they?
most,
Yes.
the 4 most important ingredients
To start community service.
Yeah, you know, and as I mentioned before, the one foundational ingredient in my mind is making certain that you treat your community partner as a partner. Too often universities come into a community and say, hey, we're here, we're going to make a difference, we're going to change this community. And the community looks back at them and says, well, wait a second. So you don't want our help? You don't want to involve us in this process? That's a little offensive and insulting. So the most important ingredient is to do it with the community, not to the community. That I can't emphasize enough, working with the individuals that are already there. You know, beyond that, there is a need for resources, really, in making a difference in economically challenged communities. It is a matter of resources. Now, a lot of times those are financial resources, but then there are also people resources, right? Whether you bring students to the table, faculty to the table or other people to the table to help out. And then what I always love to see, which really led to a lot of the successful projects, is having a faculty member that was teaching a course that course was providing the people resources to get something done, okay? And whether it was that course providing architecture students to look at the architecture in the community, or that course was providing business students to help with community members starting businesses with their business plans, or that course was providing legal support for individuals that want to start businesses, right? And so that brought the students to the table. I didn't really like it when it was faculty member and community member, and they left out the important ingredient of the students. The students are really the foundation. I sometimes would say I could take all the students at Syracuse University and move them 100 miles away. Syracuse University just moved 100 miles away because they are the foundation of who we are. So.
Thank you so much, sir. Yeah. So we end this session. We have a small video for you dedicated from our students. Sir?
A small what?
We have a small video for you from our students. Yeah. Please
Thank
enjoy.
you. Thank you. That was very nice. I really enjoyed that. Thank you very much. I appreciate you doing that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, sir, for clarifying our participants' doubts and through in-depth knowledge. It's been indeed a pleasure to listen to your valuable views and enriching thoughts, quenching our thirst for knowledge of entrepreneurship education and current day world economy. The way you have introduced experiential entrepreneurship education through your session, it is going to make a lot of difference to all upcoming entrepreneurial brains. We are extremely grateful to you for such an engaging, fruitful, and constructive talk. I'm sure our participants would have taken a lot from this session today. Thank you once again, sir, for adding value to this summit through your expertise, experience, intellect, and words of wisdom. Thank you so much, sir.
Dr. Varsha.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
Professor Kingma, I was listening to you with rapt attention, and whatever you are doing in the university is very much resonating with what we're trying to do. And I have a request, we'll be engaging with you offline. Today, of course, the time is a limitation, but believe me, it's something which is fascinating. It was a music to our ears. We came to know through you that there's a university which is trying to do something similar, because we as a university have created an ecosystem where we are not satisfied with few hundred entrepreneurs. We are looking at thousands and millions eventually, because solopreneurship is our aim, where we believe that everybody, irrespective of the discipline they belong to, can become an entrepreneur. And you're working on something, a transdisciplinary project where we bring together the students who discuss the ideas and can lead to innovative ideas which can initially be patented, and then some of them can be commercialized into startups. So thank you so much. I think for me personally, it was such an illuminating session that many of our ideas which we have been debating got more crystal clear. Thank you so much for taking our time and being with us.
Well, thank you for inviting me, and for you and everybody else that's participating. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn or reach out to me by email, and we can continue the conversation. That sounds wonderful.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Goodbye. Have a great day. Have a great conference.
Bye, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Dr. Varsha. As we have come to the end of today's session, I would like to extend my heartfelt gratitude to our esteemed speakers, Mr. Darshan Doshi, Mr. Gustavo Royas Ayala, and Dr. Bruce Kingma, for giving us enriching insights about the concept of entrepreneurship in current day business world, with trending techniques and practices to be adopted at various levels. I'm extremely thankful to our wonderful participants whose engagement and active participation fulfill the purpose of today's sessions. I would also like to convey special thanks to our summit advisors, Dr. Rogers M. Smith, Christopher H. Brown Distinguished Professor at University of Pennsylvania, USA, Dr. John Lipinski, Professor and Co-Director of the Excel Center for Entrepreneurial Excellence, Indiana University of Pennsylvania, USA, and Mr. Manoranjan Sharma, Chief Economist, Infomerics Ratings, India, who have been instrumental in making this summit meaningful. Thank you once again, everyone, for joining us. I request all of you to stay with us for 2 days for lots more to explore and learn from our eminent speakers. For tomorrow, we have with us the legendary speakers, Dr. Raj Singh, Vice Chancellor, Jain Dean to be University, speaking on the topic, creative collisions of unusual suspects to breed innovation and entrepreneurship from 6 to 7 p.m., followed by Mr. Juan Manuel Gonzalez, alumnus, Stanford University, CEO, Tech for Mexico, who will be speaking on the topic, lead an education nonprofit, creating a culture that welcomes entrepreneurial ideas, followed by a session from the last speaker of the day, Dr. Luke Pitave, Professor of Entrepreneurship at Ohio University, USA, speaking on the topic, theories of entrepreneurial opportunity and their impact in ideation techniques, requesting all participants to stay tuned throughout as it's mandatory to fill feedback form for all sessions to receive certificate. Tomorrow, we are going to begin with the session at 6 p.m. sharp with our first speaker, requesting you all to log in 15 minutes prior to the session. Hope to see you tomorrow at 5:45 p.m. IST. Have a great time. Thank you.